Bombs for Kids. It's KARS. Bombs for Kids. 1-877. Bombs for Kids. It's donate your bombs today. Donate online. Bombs for Kids. Bombs for Kids.
Pickup is quick and easy. You'll get a vacation voucher and maximum tax deduction.
1-877. Bombs for Kids. It's donate your bombs today.
By the window, that is where I'll be. Come tiptoe through the tulips with me. Oh.
An independent review. We'll share the results of that independent review with the American people as well.
I requested the Office of Independent Review, OIR, to conduct a complete, thorough, and objective independent review of allegations and misinformation related to two separate incidents.
Make this an independent review.
These were independent reviews. The after action.
Welcome to the Independent Review, a weekly podcast where we bring you the latest from the world of independent journalism.
Welcome to another episode of the Independent Review, live on the AM Wake Up Rockfin and Rumble channels. We have a great show today, so let's jump right into our first clip with Rachel Blevins and Sam Husini.
I want to get your take on the latest here, as it has been a crazy 2 weeks in the U.S. political world, to say the least. And after weeks of speculation, Biden announced that he was dropping out of the 2024 race last weekend, only to then endorse Kamala Harris to take his place. And since then, she has been endorsed by, all of the Democratic Party elites, right? The Clintons, Pelosi, and now the Obamas, all even though no one voted for her. Did any of kind of what has unfolded over the last week come as a surprise to you?
Well, I've been writing quite regularly over the last several weeks, beginning with the debate, that there's a plan in play here. All debates have been done after the conventions, and the Democratic and Republican establishment have spent decades ensuring that and putting in place their commission for presidential debates, and that only it could run the debates and so on. Suddenly they tossed all of that out the window. Never happened before. Why'd they do that? No reason was given. And the other anomaly that I saw, even before all of this transpired, was that in every other year that I could find, the Democratic and Republican conventions happen back to back. Like, one will happen one week and then the other will happen the next week, and they alternate. Every 4 years, 1 year the Republicans goes first, 1 year the Democrats goes first. This year, the Republicans go first, and the Democrats don't start for another month. Completely unprecedented as far as I can find. And I went back and found out when they announced when the conventions would be, and the Republicans announced when their conventions would be in 2020, and the Democrats in the spring of 2023, so more than a year ago. There was a plan. There was a plan in place in order to have Biden step aside. Now, why did they execute this plan? The Democrats, the DNC has rigged primaries for the last, certainly in 2016 and in 2020. There's a fairly good understanding in progressive and other circles about that. Here, they outdid themselves. They rigged the primaries by obliterating them completely. There effectively were no primaries. There were no primary debates. They heralded that we have an incumbent president, and how dare you say that there should be debates. We have to get behind our president, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then they have an early debate, where they can predictably highlight, suddenly they all recognize his mental limitations, which they've been denying for this entire time. So time to shuffle him off the stage. And it dominates the headlines for weeks on weeks, ensuring that Gaza primarily and other things are not in the headlines. So everybody's focusing on what is the most ridiculous of horse races. It's a chronic problem that big media make people pay attention to the horse races. Here you had them focusing on a horse race where there wasn't a race. It wasn't, saying, oh, was Biden ahead? Is Sanders ahead? Or something like that. No, there's no choice. It's all about Biden or not Biden. And it's all about, is he old and not old? And in the process, they rebrand Biden from Genocide Joe to Geriatric Joe. He's a kindly man. He's so decent compared to Trump. This was the mantra. This was a plan by the DNC to fulfill their purposes, which is effectively the destruction of democracy, no primary process, no actual debate. If Joe Biden had in 2023 said, I'm old, I've done my bit, I'm out, I'm passing it to a new generation, you would have had some semblance of debate within the Democratic Party, and you might have had some people throwing their hat into the ring to say, "Oh, this genocide is awful, and we're going to stand up to it." And you would have had that as part of the political process. Elections are supposed to be about issues and about bringing forward issues. All of that was avoided by the process that they put into place. It's brilliant, really. I think that people misunderstand what the establishment is. They think it's bungling. It's not bungling. They had a plan. They executed it very well. They now have everybody behind Harris after all these people spent their time saying, oh, the Obamas are going to undermine Harris. Oh, da, 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 da. And people spent all their time and effort critiquing the machinations of this instead of realizing there's a plan. And part of the plan is to take your eyes off of Gaza. And part of the plan is to get everybody behind Harris, rebrand her as progressive, even though she's been an adamant supporter of Israel forever and a day, and get everybody behind her to collapse whatever significance there was of the uncommitted movement and other movement. Elections have been movement killers. Right. Mm-hmm. It's a way of stuffing everybody back in their partisan boxes. And to cut off independent thought, meaningful thought, serious scrutiny of the candidates, because very few people can say, okay, I got to vote for this person, but they're really bad in this way, and this way. People end up rationalizing and saying, oh gosh, I hope Harris does the right thing. And, it's the best shot we have for a better future. And I really don't like this, but we got to do this. We got to get behind Harris, and we got to focus on how bad Trump is. Mm-hmm. That's what the DNC is banking on. And that's why I have a solution to all of this. I think we've discussed it before, Rachel, which is my vote pact strategy. Disenchanted would-be Harris voters and would-be Trump voters should pair up and both vote for independent candidates that more reflect their beliefs. Would-be Harris voter can vote for Jill Stein or any other left-wing party, Greens, whoever, socialists, and the would-be Trump voters can vote for the Libertarians or Constitution Party or whoever. This means that people need to get together instead of being playthings of Fox and MSNBC.
Next, we have this clip from Jeremy Ryan Slate and his interview with Hrvoje Moric.
All these things are really coalescing, and then you got the Venezuela stuff going on.
I was going to ask about the Venezuela thing. How does that even fit into this? Because I've been very like I don't get it. So I guess following it as it was happening, and I was on a road trip when this was happening. So I was kind of checking in between rest stops. We were coming back from Maine to New Jersey, which is like a 7-hour drive, and initially they're reporting 132% of people voted. So like, okay, you got to figure Maduro did some funny stuff, right? But then the thing that's strange about it is the U.S. government comes in, and the U.S. government says, we're losing our patience with the presidential count in Venezuela. And I'm like, this is the same government that told us, hey, election day is not a day anymore, it's a week. And I'm just, how does that kind of fit into the whole like narrative of what's happening right now?
I mean, my bottom line with Venezuela is, I was thinking about this the other day. There's no conclusion here. I don't like the Maduro regime. I think that's kind of obvious. A lot of people don't. I am here in Mexico, so I get to talk to Mexicans that visit Cuba, or I mean, that's another issue, Cuba as well, or from Venezuela. Just as an aside, the situation in Cuba, like I'm talking to Mexicans who have just come from Cuba and Cubans that are fleeing. There's some in my church attending here. They sit right next to me and we talk. It's dire. It's so horrible in Cuba, the situation. And then my reaction is like, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place where, okay, of course communism sucks, but the American empire is also wanting regime change and to bring in its oligarchy. And so, but I think like if it's this bad, it's almost like, you guys got to throw in the towel, you communist revolutionaries, and just accept the American. I mean, because people literally can't eat, they're dying. And so Venezuela is like, I don't like the Maduro regime, but I also don't like American imperial regime change, and which is also, America declared, the State Department yesterday, I think declared, they selected they declared the president of Venezuela. Like, I mean, really? You can now just, isn't that wonderful? U.S. can just declare who's the president of your country. So it's two bad options, and I don't really see any solution there.
Well, yeah, and and also as well, once again, as a guy I don't put a lot of trust in. I don't know do you know who Jackson Hinkle is?
Yeah, I saw photos of him there now.
Well,
yeah.
he put out a video. This is on the 21st, so like about 10 days ago, and he said, breaking, officially launching the American Communist Party. I'm like, wait, where does this come from? Like, so it's disconcerting about like, what do you grab to? Who do you trust? Like, what's happening right now? And you got to kind of wonder, like, how much controlled opposition is running around out there?
Yeah, I never liked folks like Jackson Hinkle.
He always felt too smug for me.
But I feel like he was artificially boosted. A lot of people come out of nowhere. And I've been discussing this, this idea of multipolarity. I think it's a scam. I think it's just the other side of the BlackRock coin. It's a globalist project. And then there are people being paid and boosted online into that sphere, like Jackson Hinkle. And, I was recently attacked. I think a past guest of both of ours, Yuri Roshka, former Moldovan politician. Today, the news is he's going to jail for 6 years for no reason, for being a dissident. And the Moldovan government is taken over. It's a globalist. And then 2 weeks ago, and this ties into the Jackson Hinkle thing, some anonymous website, some guys started doing write-ups on me just because I had some conversations with some people in this sphere of multipolarity, like who are linked to Dugin, and I don't doubt they're right to investigate that thread. There's some connections between Russian government and I think even the Russian wing of globalism who are financing, pushing Dugin, pushing multipolarity and all these things. But they're trying to make me out to be a Russian agent, which could have consequences, right? Mm-hmm. I could eventually be fined or jailed by the DHS, NATO, Pentagon. So I'm calling these Pentagon active measures. And that same week that happened to me, Jonathan Turley, this renowned lawyer, who I sat at the table with him at the Ron Paul Institute conference last year, he said that same week NewsGuard went after him, and NewsGuard is just a front for NSA Pentagon, which is they're trying to be the arbiter of truth. They were trying to do a similar thing to him while I was getting this write-up, where they're trying to pin him down as either a libertarian or a conservative. First, they're trying to find out where his money's coming from to figure out how they can defund him because he's independent. They can't. And then they're trying to get him to label himself as a conservative or libertarian so they can say, aha, conservative, conspiracy theorist, Russian agent or something. But he's a registered Democrat. He's got libertarian ideas. He's got conservative. He's got everything. And that's the most difficult for them. And that's how I am. Because I talk to everyone, so it's hard to pin me down. And this guy coming after me was also, painting all of his targets as conservative or libertarian. So again, this seems to be a coordinated effort against dissidents, particularly in the West. And that's really that goes back to Jackson Hinkle. I think he's part of some sort of operation, and we all got to be very careful about what we're consuming. And Trevor Ludon, who I've interviewed, and other people are pointing out what Dugin and some of these multipolaristas are promoting, and they've openly said it. Like, they want civil war in America. They sort of want America to be broken down, and this Communist Party. I mean, could you imagine, Jeremy?
It just seems so out of left field, though, because Jackson Hinkle was portraying himself as like this, like, I don't know if you'd say America first, but I think that he used the words patriot and things like that. And you're like, wait, you're American Communist Party. You're so far off the mark, man. What the heck happened?
But it's MAGA communism. That was their shtick, MAGA.
So I don't understand. I know Tim Pool did an episode in this a while ago where they had a debate about it was MAGA communism versus something else. And I don't get it. What the heck is MAGA communism? Like, I don't quite understand.
I mean, I don't either. I've talked to some of those. I've talked to a couple of those folks. But again, some people say, again, this is part of this Russian multipolar, Dugin intellectually has sort of been influential. They're pushing this. And in some ways, I think some of these people might be useful idiots because, like you say, it just doesn't make sense. And it's being used to create chaos in America, because the part of the whole idea of this multipolar BRICS thing is, the West is right now economically, militarily superior, but again, the end goal for me, I'm obsessed with world government. The end goal is world empire, world government, and BRICS and multipolarity is part of that. They need to even things out, and so they need to have the West decline as multipolarity and BRICS countries, global South rise, and they need America to go through, like, to be balkanized, to be weakened. And so this just seems part of the process. It doesn't make sense, MAGA communism, but I think they're playing on, the working class woes. There's truth there, right? The working class, the MAGA class, we're all suffering. We just want to get on with life and, work hard and not be bothered, not having transit stuff shoved down our throat. And so, yeah,
it's interesting. As I said, like, Tim Pool did their culture war show. That's the one I was on talking about the Roman Empire. Like, they do these like good debates between people, and they had one. It was MAGA communism versus something else. And I just, once again, I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, it would seem like what make America great again and what communism are two different things. Like, I just don't see, like, I can see there's layover in what you care about, but like, I don't see how the two things fit. So I guess, like, looking at it, how much of what we're dealing with right now is controlled opposition? Like, I guess, like, when we're looking at kind of what we're seeing online, like, how much control is actually being run on what we're seeing and what we're dealing with? Because I think this kind of fits in what you're talking about global governance, but how much of that is controlled, man?
I think a good portion of it. Now, it's hard to say who, and I don't personally like to call out specifically because it's difficult because you don't have the evidence. And as I don't like being called out, I shook hands with Gorbachev, and so I'm a Russian agent. Okay. But wasn't in Russia, where Gorbachev is considered a Western agent who helped bring down the Soviet Union? So it's like, doesn't make any sense. But actually today I was planning to record a podcast with a friend to look at alternative media and the Gnostic New Age theosophic angle. So it's like all of a sudden you're noticing across the spectrum in alt media, they're pushing Gnosticism, New Age, theosophy, which is actually it's globalist. So
right,
and so there's that vector, as you mentioned. There's the MAGA communist vector, which is just that just seems to be a ruse for the age old communism to seep in, right? So MAGA communism is nothing. It's just another backdoor that they found to sneak in to try again to start communism in America or advance it. So I'm highly suspicious these days. My default is kind of like whatever I'm listening to, you're guilty until proven innocent, because it's just, we've been burned so many times with the people that we're listening to podcasts and channels. And so you got to look at where the money's coming from, the sponsors, what people talk about, what they don't talk about. associations, their track record, that sort of stuff.
Now, let's jump to this clip from Ryan Cristian and his interview with James Lee.
Welcome to The Last American Vagabond. That was the teaser clip put out by James Lee for his outstanding mini documentary around the ADL that he recently put out, which is entitled Uncovering America's Most Powerful Civil Rights Group. Really an outstanding piece of work. And I appreciate the amount of effort put in this, the editing, and even the fact that it's a shorter done piece of work that will reach a lot more people. And if you guys watching our work, for a long time now, but even just over the last so many months, you've noticed that a growing interest in these topics and the truth around these topics, and something he addresses in this documentary, how it's publicly available information, but for some reason people have started to look into this more post October 7th. So I invited James on today to discuss what he found around the ADL and how important this conversation is. So James, thank you so much for joining today. How are you?
Good. Hey, Ron, thanks for having me. And I appreciate the compliments on the piece.
It really is well done, man. And I really, there's a lot of information packed into this 21-minute documentary. And I think it's we can get into this and why this is happening, but it is a very interesting thing to see for how long this has kind of been the set narrative and how much has suddenly started to be dismantled. And this piece of work, I think, is going to reach a lot of people that would otherwise not see it. So any thoughts you want to throw out before we get started? I wanted to really start with the history around all this, but anything you want to start with?
Yeah, absolutely. I know this is a topic that's sort of very challenging to talk about, and groups like the ADL have made it very difficult to talk about because they purposefully try to conflate concepts like anti-Semitism, like anti-Zionism. All these things are tied together. And so what we want to do, or what I want to do, is make sure we're very careful in the language that we're going to use in terms of describing this as not something that is a sort of attack against the Jewish faith, the Jewish religion, but we're talking more or less kind of about a clandestine spy operation that's happening in the United States. And we want to be very careful and very deliberate about, how we discuss this topic.
Absolutely. And this is an important thing to start with, and as you all well know, watching this, the audience of Last American Vagabond in general, very, very, very adamant about the differentiation between what Zionism is, what Judaism is, the understanding of those differences, and recognizing that it's entirely, it's within criticizing politics is absolutely within the realm of what is acceptable. The reason I even hesitate there is because, in my opinion, everything's acceptable. That's for your choice to take the consequences of what you decide your speech is. But my point is that it's to criticize Zionism and the actions of a government. It's amazing that anybody ever tried to conflate that with the idea of racism. But as you do a great job with the interviews on this documentary, obviously there's an overlap. Obviously, anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish sentiments exist in the world, as do pretty much all forms of racism. And that's important to make sure we all understand that. And to what he was highlighting there in the beginning is that it's important to recognize that there are very sensitive conversations around this. And it's important, at least from my perspective and from my expressing my own thoughts, to try to reach those people more than anybody who are good people who genuinely care about human rights and what people are dealing with, but have been kind of manipulated by the way they're viewing this. And I think that's what this is really aimed at, right? Like trying to show people that there is an important nuance to this. And as you highlighted, and one of the things that really stood out to me, which we'll get to, is that, ADL is just like a spy organization against Americans for a foreign country. And I think any American would care about that, just kind of decoupling that from the religion and the nationality around it, that we're being spied on by a foreign country, or at least through an entity that isn't in the interest of Americans. At least that's how I read it. So I completely agree with you, man. So I think it's important to start there.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that I think the stuff that we talk about today it should be people's kind of first step in unlocking and unraveling this type of information. And I would encourage people to take, what we talk about today, do sort of your own research, your own Googling around it, go a step further. Because I think for a lot of folks, that maybe this is the introduction. And I always encourage folks, to fact check, to look into things for yourself, and then come up with your own feeling or conclusion about how you feel about certain topics.
Absolutely. My audience is already shaking their head because that's what we say every single show, right? Question everything, come to your own conclusions. And I 100% agree. So let's start with the history around this, because this is obviously, as you know, during your research, one of the most sensitive, contentious parts of this. The story around, in particular, B'nai B'rith, Leo Frank, So start there for us. Again, take as short or as long as you'd like. I know it's a huge topic to discuss and outline the history of those things and how this kind of got started.
Yeah. I imagine some folks have probably heard of the Anti-Defamation League, probably not too much beyond, hey, they're sort of a Jewish rights organization. And so we do want to unpack that history a little bit. So it started more than 100 years ago in 1913, and it was started after or in the sort of the wake of a very controversial murder trial. And this is one that I haven't dug super deep into, so I'll just give people kind of the high level of it. So there was a man named Leo Frank who was a Jewish businessman. He worked in a factory in Atlanta, and he was accused of raping and murdering one of his employees, a 13-year-old girl named Mary Fagan. And so after there was a whole trial, and during that, this is the part where I think more research should really be done about it, on my part as well as everybody's parts. The general thing, kind of high level, is that he was convicted of murder, but it was through the testimony so basically they were trying to pin it on this other gentleman named Jim Connolly, who was one of the janitors, an African-American janitor who worked in that factory. And there was a lot of accusations of anti-Semitism and a kind of a mistrial type situation. And ultimately, after he was convicted, Leo Frank was basically abducted from prison and lynched. And this is kind of I find it to be kind of a crazy situation, because both sides are kind of claiming racism, right? Because you have this trial happened in the Deep South, in Georgia, at a time, in the Jim Crow era. So to have sort of an unbelievable turn of events where because both people gave their testimony, and basically, Jim Connolly's testimony wore out in terms of the justice system, but it basically believing a black man over a Jewish man. I felt like that's like a fascinating thing to unravel, which I haven't done so yet. And maybe that's kind of the next piece of research that I'll be doing. But that is, I don't know how you find it, Ryan. It's kind of an interesting dynamic, right? That's what they're insinuating. So in terms of Frank's, whether or not he was guilty or innocent, I think there is a lot of evidence kind of on both sides about that. And like I said, I haven't looked deeply enough to really determine for myself, but it was certainly, there's a lot of controversy. And that was kind of the origins of why the ADL started, because it's true. I think we have to acknowledge that anti-Jewish sentiment, anti-Semitism is very real in terms of people who discriminate and take, actions that's hateful based on somebody's religion or race. That happens for sure. We can't deny that.
Right.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to just add, which is interesting the way you frame that, and this is kind of where, and again, the main kind of thrust of the documentary is focused on the ADL's work in the United States and the spying and so on. This is kind of the precursor and the history around it. But what's interesting that you described there is they're both accusing either side of racism, and this kind of brought a thought to mind, which you kind of highlight in the documentary and the further parts of this. And we'll get into this about the ADL sort of utilizing what is a genuine thing in the world, but not necessarily to stop it, but rather it's kind of like the fuel on which this entity, thrives. And so it's interesting that you could see this origin point where it doesn't really matter what side is. It's just that, well, there's racism and it's everywhere and we have to utilize, it's interesting, not to say that was even manufactured at the point, but it's interesting. You can see the starting point there where it's really just about having the accusation and having the disagreement, the divide, and I find that to be a very interesting point there. So essentially the point is, and I recommend you do your research out there and ask these questions for yourself, but my opinion is that the ADL built itself around this, and it wasn't necessarily about the idea of trying to stop anything, but rather kind of build on the use of this divide and the manipulation. And I think that's how this all kind of grew from there. And I think what we see is this comes into the idea of, you go into the documentary kind of right after that in the conversation of the ADL, Zionism, Israel, and the idea of the communist Red Scare conversation. And so if there's anything in between there that you want to touch on, please. But I think what this brings next step for me is that we saw this building of And I also want to say as well, I believe I'm sure there are people that work in these organizations that have good intentions. I always think that's likely or possible in anything we're talking about, but I think it's about the leadership and the intent. And so bringing this forward to the next aspect of this, we saw the organization build into something that was about surveillance and spying, and arguably they would claim for the interest of protecting Jewish people. But talk about that moment there and what you saw in your investigation around the kind of Red Scare conversation. And so this is something that we are seeing in a way happen again today around different talking points, or really anti-Semitism being one of them, but censoring people based on different beliefs, whether it's foreign policy or, so you're supporting Russia when that's the focal point or whatever it is. And I wonder if you see the same kind of things back then. Did you see that as sort of the ADL or Israel using this to attack the people they wanted to attack on different reasons? Go ahead. However you see that that point in this conversation.
Yeah. So in terms of the history, I think the Israel part came about a little bit later, because for a lot of the first part of the history, Israel was not yet an established country. But one of the main points that I think is really important to get across is how an organization functions in terms of achieving their goal, right? So if their goal, so they say, is to stop hate of all forms against Jewish people, against Black people, against Asian people, but then the ways they do it, the ways they engage, it leads us down a different path, because what we saw from the very beginning really is kind of an entanglement with state and establishment powers. So it's sort of the opposite of what you would expect from a civil rights group, which is typically to fight for the liberties of individual people against the tyranny of the state and other powerful institutions. So right from the beginning, they sort of align themselves to, I don't know, today we would say that they're the deep state. That's kind of the term that people use nowadays. And you saw that right away through sort of the anti-communist purge that happened shortly after World War II, and that they were sort of an arm of that whole investigation in terms of spying on people, reporting information back to the government. And so that's already kind of a red flag. And I think the pushback or the other side of that would be, well, they are, on the side of Americans, and they're trying to, figure out if the country is being infiltrated. I think looking back in hindsight, we know now there was a lot of just kind of witch hunt during that era, right? The people who weren't necessarily communists, but they were just speaking out against maybe the agenda of whatever the government wanted to do at the time. They would just slap this tag on you. Very similar to what.
Oh, we lost you there. Good. You're right. I imagine you were going to say very similar to the anti-Semitism scare of today, I'm thinking, but I'll wait for you to come back. I hope we didn't lose you. Well, hopefully he's going to come back shortly. What I was going to, what jumped into my mind is the conversation around that kind of overlap, right? And the idea of the...
Hey, apologies.
No worries. Go ahead. I was just kind of trying to fill the gap there. Were you going to say the anti-Semitism aspect of today? Was that the comparative point?
Not only just anti-Semitism, but you saw it through COVID. Hey, this guy's anti-vax, or this guy's. They're doing this to a guy like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. right now, right? He's some kind of crazy brain worm. Like, they basically just throw these guys. You're racist. You're sexist. All these kinds of things for people who aren't even necessarily guilty of that. It's just an easy way to sort of push somebody aside and say, hey, this guy's, you don't want to associate with this guy. And that's kind of, when I look back at the communist scare, I think that was a lot of it was that, right? I think a lot of people are anti-communist for good reason, but for then that to become sort of the attack against anybody who's just speaking out against injustices is
and this is the great part. You made this numerous times, and I'm blanking on her name, but one of the women, the Jewish activist you spoke to, made this point about how it seems that the focal point ends up being on anti-apartheid South Africa activists, or people that are Desmond Tutu, for people like that have a clear history of advocating for human rights and freedom, and yet you see them focusing on them as sort of the enemy or and so that's kind of where I wondered what you saw in that part of the investigation. Is this, even back then, where as you just even highlighted that, and whether I would personally also argue that just because somebody may believe in communism or socialism, that therefore make them a bad person, that I think all government, in my opinion, different topic, can end up in the same position. But I think what's interesting is that, or the question is, did you see some of the same things in that part of the time frame that whether this was, and good point, by the way, 48 forward, Israel created, but the point being that I think Zionism is what I was highlighting there, influencing the ADL. Do you think that was part of it? Were they doing this at communist entities that were maybe anti what their agenda was? Or, how do you read that part of it? I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think I read that part of it actually probably from a more self-interest perspective, in that they did not want the Jewish people to be associated with communism. So I think there was a bit of self-interest when I was doing my research. That seemed like some of the motivation. Although I would say that, the motivation behind anything shouldn't justify doing legal things, right? Just because something is the right, like the end doesn't justify the means. Nobody.
I'm losing you again. I completely agree, by the way, and I think that's a point that everyone in the world needs to hear right now. That this idea of might is right, or what it's literally everywhere in the conversation today. That just because you believe or you claim that you're on the right side of things, that what you do doesn't matter. Or at least that's how it ends up. Is absolutely absurd.
Next is a panel discussion from Indy at Indy News, Misty, Winston, and Scott Horton.
So we're going to dive into the latest with Israel-Palestine. Obviously, there's a metric shit ton of stuff going on. So we're going to try to piece out as much as we can. Obviously, I'm very excited to get Scott's take on this stuff. He has been very busy, so he's been a little silent on some of this. But there is a lot going on. So, Scott, just what is your general take? I know that's kind of a very crazy, broad, open-ended question, but it seems as if, we've got the situation now where it is, we're incredibly close to a whole lot of really terrible things happening. Iran's obviously nipping at the bud to get their payback. So where do you see this heading right now?
Well, I don't know. I guess I'd rather eat my words later and be wrong. But I'm not feeling the alarmism. Quite frankly, the Ayatollah doesn't want to fight. He's made that very clear, over a very long period of time here. Put yourself in his position. You're the supreme leader of Persia. What are you going to do with the problem like America? And we're not going away. And he's been the dictator over there essentially since 1989. And he's, is a very extreme leader if you live there, but he's been a real pragmatist in foreign policy. Virtually all of his major advances in foreign policy in our era have been own goals, as the soccer players call them, by the United States government, enhancing their power without much effort on their part. So I'm not looking at Iran as a real aggressive power right now, or, trying to get away with murder. Speaking of murder, they have these rumors that a Pakistani tied to Iran had tried to hire a hitman through an informant to kill Trump, and apparently Trump believes it. But that's completely crazy. But people are so used to hearing propaganda about Iran and believing it. You'll even hear people say, "Oh, did you hear that this guy was going to kill Trump? Did you hear?" And that's good enough. Like, yeah, I heard that, but you're not supposed to believe it. They lie about Iran all the time. They lie about everything. But it helps build up a caricature in the minds of the American people. But at the same time that the Ayatollah doesn't want to fight, I don't think that the Pentagon wants to fight either. Because even though if it came to a real war with Iran, America, has the ability to carpet bomb their country off the face of the earth, even without nukes. And they know that. But at the same time, it would hurt like hell trying, because they would also be able to hit American targets all throughout the Gulf, in Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia, especially. Our Fifth Fleet is stationed at Bahrain, and the Central Command is headquartered at Qatar with the giant Al Ulid Air Base, it's called there. And all of that is up for grabs because they have a huge quantity of missiles that the Americans couldn't possibly shoot down. So all those targets would be up for grabs, and we would lose, potentially thousands of lives and $1 gazillion worth of equipment over it. And for what? So is it possible that the Ayatollah, that the Ayatollah of Israel, the supreme leader of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, could drag us in, by some chess move? Possibly, but I don't think likely. And I think, Hezbollah has been essentially satisfied to do tit for tat attacks back and forth. Some rock there. Ansar Allah, aka the Houthis down in Yemen, they're getting some pot shots off. But anyway, I don't know. Biden, as much as he's even lucid at all, he doesn't want to escalate the war to like a real ass war to try to destroy Hezbollah in Lebanon. Call it the B-52, send in the Marines. He doesn't want that. And
not as he's going into an election, for sure.
Yeah, or at
know,
all.
the
And the
Democrats,
Pentagon doesn't
or at
want
all.
that. Yeah, no, they had their full of Iraq War II and Iraq War III. They're not trying to go for, to just make this worse and worse and worse over there. So the Israelis, they suck, and they're certainly putting us at risk of war getting out of control. But I think a lot of the narrative about, the threat of the war getting worse is built on presumptions of Iran and possibly Russia and China to work together to really nail us. But I don't think they're trying to do that. I think they're all mostly trying to get by rather than really figure out a way to stick one to us by, for example, Putin scheming to lure us back into Iraq or whatever. None of that is on the table, really. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't think they have to. Really, they can just sit back and let us destroy ourselves. That's what we're doing.
How do we get Gaza to end is my big question. Is it, who's gonna get them to stop? Because it's not going to be us. Obviously, it's not going to be any Western power. It's not going to convince them to stop until they've basically wiped everyone out and taken the land. And please tell me I'm wrong, because how else does this play out?
And I guess now I contradict myself completely from what I was just saying, because I think that, you're right. And ultimately, I don't know about Harris. I really don't know. When she actually is in the chair, she would be a puppet and a figurehead in this and that. But when you're actually the one in the chair, you do get to call the shots, even if it pisses everybody off, to some degree anyway. So what she would actually do, I really don't know. I fear the very worst from Donald Trump. They say, he has some grudge against Netanyahu for endorsing or, congratulating Biden for his election victory or whatever. I don't think that amounts to much. They've already made up over that. And as far as I can really tell, I don't know about all major companies in New York City, God knows what, but it sure seems like the only real power faction that supports Donald Trump is the Israel lobby, and only part of them. Much of the Israel lobby is against him as well. You got Bill Kristol leading the Never Trumpers, but his brother-in-law, Elliot Abrams, worked for Trump and is going to again. So I don't know. But I think he just has to kowtow to them because, when it comes overall to the big arms industries or to Wall Street, agribusiness, pharma, these are not all in Trump's corner. This is all the permanent establishment that supports the Democrats now in the face of his rogueness to whatever it is. So I don't know any other real power faction that's lined up behind him to support him other than at least some of the Israel lobby and the worst of them, like Miriam Adelson, who represents, a very right-wing Israeli nationalism. And so then that means, to follow the train of thought, if Trump says, look, go ahead and move them out, and there's no one to stop them, the EU ain't going to do anything, and there's nobody going to do anything. It's not like Russia's going to intervene in the Middle East to prevent that from happening. But if that does happen, that could set off the entire region. I think Erdogan talks a lot. I don't know how much he really means it, but he's made some real threats, at least against Israel. He may intervene at that point. That's a NATO ally, Turkey.
He said something to the ICJ.
Not a treaty ally. I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, Erdogan just yesterday or today sent something to the ICJ about Israel again, and he's been pretty bombastic, like you said. Yeah,
and you could have a coup in Egypt or in Jordan, and so those could stop being friends with Israel overnight. And we're talking in the face of a massive cleansing campaign from East Jerusalem and Hebron and Ramallah and Bethlehem and the rest, out of the West Bank. That could lead to all kinds of shifting alliances and a real regional war, even Sunni kings toppled and joining the fight with the Shiites. Because see, really pisses me off. You hear pro-Israeli people argue about the Palestinians that, well, nobody else wants them either.
Ugh.
And it's funny because on one hand, they're taking the words literally right out of the mouth of Adolf Hitler after
Yes,
the
they are.
conference, talking about, well, you don't want the Jews because they're all a bunch of terrorists and criminals, and that's why it's fine. And I don't want to hear another word about why it's not okay for me to do what I do with them either, he said. And so on one hand, they're literally invoking the words of the Fuhrer in order to justify their position there. But secondly, their implication is that, again, to paraphrase him, that the Palestinians are all just terrorists and criminals. But that's not the point. The point is that if even the worst of these Sunni kings sit there and do nothing while every last Muslim is cleansed from the Holy Land, from historic Palestine, then that means that they completely lose control of all of the holy sites. That means they're going to blow up the Al-Aqsa Mosque and rebuild the temple and all this crazy stuff. So
they don't want to lose Jerusalem. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what it's about. It's not like, because they were all just ridden with tuberculosis, or they're all just rapists ready to come across the border or whatever, like in the right-wing narratives. That's not what it is, And just especially back to the first part, to hear Zionist Jews invoking Hitler's exact statements about them in order to, and ignorantly, right?
It's
they don't
mind blowing.
Yeah, they don't know that this is a Hitler quote from the Evian after the Evian conference, but it is what it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it was their land. It was still their land. I mean, that I'm an anti-Zionist Jew, so like this is. I had to deprogram. I was raised Zionist. I didn't even know, they didn't teach us the Nakba. They didn't teach us anything about how we got it. It was gifted to us. Forget about who was there, or how they did anything, right?
Yep.
And it's remarkable. But
Americans too. That's how it's taught to Americans too. I'm not quite 50, and basically they never really explain it, but the idea is that if anybody had to be moved out of the way, it was like these brown-skinned barbarian types anyway. So who cares? You know what I mean? As they call them in Texas, they're towel heads or camel jockeys or sand N-words or whatever. That was the way they called them. When I was a kid, they really don't count compared to people who are white-skinned Europeans. And so just who cares? And for the most part too, and things have changed now with the internet, I guess. When I was growing up, nobody ever said anything about Israel at all. Except, they're bombing Beirut or whatever on the nightly news. But there was never really any explanation or discussion of Israel or their role in America or what was going on over there. Israel's just a word in a Christmas song. We didn't ever hear anything really about what was going on over there because it didn't really matter. The idea was that this occupation is going on and all that, but the people being occupied are essentially animals anyway. So who cares? Yeah. Nobody cares. And as I remember Noam Chomsky saying, because he's quite a bit older than me, I remember him saying that when the first Intifada broke out in 1987, the reaction inside the United States was, well, what do these people have to be upset about at all? That they had no real understanding that the occupation was 20 years old at that point, and that they knew that they would never be free and they would never have independence, and that they were getting completely screwed. They weren't even going to be able to get their measly stinking 22% of historic Palestine. And so that's what they were writing over. But that the way Chomsky put it was, this is absolutely a mystery to the Americans of what is even the problem, because they never explain it.
No.
And
when they do, they
think
lie.
about it-
Like it's all lies and propaganda. We're all told that, Israel is our ally. It's the only democracy in the Middle East. They're the most moral army on the planet. All of those things that they're telling us now. Sorry, Andy, go ahead.
And we never get told to look at it from the perspective of a 19-year-old Palestinian male who's been raised in this environment where they've literally since birth have been treated like criminals and thugs and less than, and then expect to have them treat anybody with respect, with dignity,
right?
with authority. I mean, the only thing that they know is fear and violence, and this is how
Well, that's what is so frustrating for me, especially as a parent. I mean, I'm sitting here looking at what's taking place and the way that they have been brutalizing the people of Palestine for decades and the way that these kids have grown up in this environment. And in these situations, I always imagine what that would be like to live in that situation. And when I think about that, and then I think about the way that they target these kids and they have snipers taking out their limbs. And I mean, you're goddamn right I would join Hamas. You know what I mean? Like, somebody's going to clip that and call me a terrorist. I don't give a fuck. That is exactly what I would do. I think any human being with an ounce of humanity would do the same. You're going to fight against something like that. You're going to fight against that type of occupation and brutalization. Anybody would. And the idea that it is seen or treated as if it is this unreasonable reaction, and that how dare they just need to be grateful for what they've been given. I mean, it is insane. And just to go back to your point about the Nazi mentality and the way that they're literally almost word for word quoting Adolf Hitler, that is so fascinating to me. Watching this take place and watching the way the Zionist Jews have allowed themselves to become what was done to them is psychologically, to me, fascinating. I don't know how that happens, how you are able to, obviously the people who are alive today, most of them didn't experience the Holocaust, but clearly they are from that bloodline. And to have that happen to you and your family, and then to do the same thing to others is just, I don't know how you allow yourself to get to that point, but that's exactly what we're watching play out. And it is unbelievably terrifying to examine that. And I mean, we're looking at go ahead.
It's real simple, right? I mean, I've heard Zionist Jews before in the face of criticism against Palestine, just immediately with a phrase, just say, well, what about what the Germans did to us? And then the whole point is, well, that was wrong. So you should not do that. But that's not the way they take it. It's just a license.
Now, we take a look at this clip from the Third Rail podcast with host Nature Boy and his guests Courtney Turner, William Ramsey, and Steve Poikonen.
When I first started talking about it, I was showing all these articles about how the mask was not only not helpful, but it was actually deleterious, that this was causing, health compromises, and that it was really harmful. And people were arguing with me just incessantly about this. And of course, a few years later, we have all these articles coming forth, all the media talking about actually masks can do harm, which we knew. I mean, that we've known since the beginning of people wearing masks. We've always known that there are, deleterious effects of wearing masks. But because now it was being so widely disseminated, I started to ask why now are they okay telling you that masks couldn't be problematic? And the reason usually why they reveal truths at a certain time is usually demoralization and destabilization. It breeds chaos and conflict, and that's a breeding ground for usurpation of power. So, and resentment. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the revelation method is also a silent contract.
Mm-hmm.
If they show you what they're going to be doing, then if you, by your silence, that's consent, and now they are free to do whatever they want, and they are free from the occultic or esoteric karma aspect of it. It's kind of like the cremation of care thing, I think.
Yeah, no, they say that. But
recall though that in 1981, then CIA Director William Casey
Mm-hmm.
said, we'll know our disinformation campaign is complete when nothing the American public believes is true. Honestly, from that point on, really, they could flat out tell you whatever they wanted, because what Casey was ultimately saying is we're going to flood the zone so much with rampant intentional mis and disinformation that we're going to make you ultimately confused.
Right.
Because when people are either scared or confused, they become much more malleable. And that's in '89. Ed Herman wrote a book called Manufacturing Consent, and then an attention-seeking, rent-seeking whore attached his name to it, and people know the book by that guy's name.
Really?
But Ed Herman wrote a book called Manufacturing Consent. I contend that from about the time the ink was drying on the Patriot Act, if not before, consent had been manufactured. And consent had been fully given. And the primary function of the media from 2001 on, part of that project for a new American century, ultimately, is manufacturing confusion. And that's where the 24-hour news cycle and counter-reinforcing propaganda and narratives coming, where ultimately the spin is to get you to do one thing and one thing only: participate in a consent ritual for bloodline pedophiles.
Right.
People call it voting, but that's what it is. And so you'll get different angles of the exact same narrative delivered to you nonstop. And that's what our media cycle has been for, I'm going to say, at least 20 years. William could probably speak to that better than me, though.
Yeah, and William, you have something you wanted me to throw up on stage.
Yeah, it's just more of the blasphemy. They played along with the Last Supper theme. But this just kind of shows this is the Last Supper. This other one, the Feast of the Gods, is based on the Last Supper, which is then Olympics 2024. So they're definitely playing along with that. And there's a very much they're sophisticated, occultically sophisticated, because they included all kinds of symbolism from past occultism, and there's Mithraism symbology in the entire presentation. There's a picture of a golden calf, which can be interpreted in multiple things, whether it's the golden calf
or
of rebellion against Moses, or of Mithraism, which was actually very common kind of 1st, 2nd century AD. So let me see if I can find that other picture.
Jung was a Mithrian. He was very enchanted with the cult of Mithra.
Which is very graphic. There was a bull worship. You would take the bull and slit its throat and stand under it and let the bull's blood kind of cover you. It's very, it's really something else.
Yeah, I think that, with any symbolism, there's so many different layers. And I mean, I think the surface layer is the mockery of the Last Supper. That's just blatant. And then, I mean, what really puts a cherry on top of anything, when they bring out Papa Smurf on a food tray. Okay. So I'm looking at just that symbolism, and I'm like, could that represent cannibalism?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a total Abramovich kind of party. With the body on a tray, right?
The body on a tray.
It's almost like a mockery of the wine and bread, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And I think
Eucharist.
Dionysus represented that too. So that's
Let me pull some stuff up on Dionysus here. But there was
Hermaphrodite, and the festivals were let's sacrifice goats, coat ourselves in blood, drink blood, and diddle kids.
Yeah,
that was, I mean, that's what they were ultimately celebrating. And they did say, there was intentional stagecraft so that it would absolutely resemble the Last Supper. The IOC tried to downplay that, but then the people who were the ones that were on stage were like, yeah, no, that's what we were doing.
Pretty obvious. I don't think they needed to say it.
The
It was,
layout is so
yeah.
simple. It's a long
Yeah.
rectangular table. I mean, give me
Pretty
a
hard
break.
to deny that one.
Can you pull this up, Nature Boy?
Yeah,
Okay,
sure I
pull that up,
can.
because that's
Yeah,
the
man.
golden calf.
There you
So
go.
I don't
Yeah, the
need.
golden
There's
calf.
different ways to interpret that, but
But whatever it is, that was meant there for a specific reason. And they have everybody that's in the occult, right? They're liars. They have to be, because they've taken sacred oaths. So when somebody as a layman will point out some of their symbiology, they'll say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. It's about this, this, and this, and this. And in some facts, the person speaking that might even actually believe it, because they're not been initiated enough. So it goes back to my original point. That's put there for a reason. It's not just like some dude going, hey, man, like, dude, let's put a cow up there and like paint it gold. Wouldn't that be cool? No, that doesn't happen on productions like this, man.
no, look at somebody lovingly put that together. You know, the light of the golden calf, the reflection off the golden calf. But yeah, no, and I think that these huge kind of pageants, they're occulted. So there's one interpretation for the initiates and the other profane. Leave the profane kind of confused and mystified. It's all intentional.
And there's different levels of that as well. I think this is the hardest thing for the masses to accept. And it's not just in, like Olympics semiotics. I think this is true there's so many layers of this. When you talk about the media, I mean, the media is no longer media. It's like 24/7 social media propaganda. So, but there's always these exoteric veneers, and then there are the esoteric messaging and signaling to initiates. And it's not just signaling to the initiates. There's various levels of initiated.
Yes.
Right. And so it becomes really layered. And I think it's the hardest thing for a lot of, for lack of a better way of putting it, but just normie masses to accept that there is esoteric messaging and that there is esoteric signaling that's occurring, because they're looking at something, they're looking at the exoteric veneer, and to them it seems very clear and very evident. They're taking it as face value. And it's very hard to convince somebody who isn't familiar, with mysticism or esotericism and how the occult operates, to convince them that that's possible and that that's what's at play.
Well, it goes back. We were talking earlier about creating the new world order, and you went through a whole bunch of things. And I think one of you mentioned Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes and the Round Table was a secret society within a secret society within a secret society within a semi-public society within a public society.
Sure.
So it goes right back to it. And the people in the core that say the ring that surrounded the core, those people didn't even know there was another ring within it or who the members were.
Right.
And that was a small group of people. And it's just the hierarchy nature of occult organizations or organizations in general. The pyramid, the higher you go, the more you know, and the more you have control over the people below you.
Right. Yeah. That's very true.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing this in many ways. Part of me, and it's just kind of my crazy conspiratorial mind, but can't stop thinking that maybe some of these high-level occultists who really run the world, I mean, when you go into study the elite of the elite, yeah, many of them are into pedophilia and those little eyes wide shut parties and stuff like that. And I can't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they're telling us they're in control. And as Larry Nichols said, maybe they're starting to stop. They're not lying as much and revealing who they are and what their plans are. Does that sound crazy to you?
I think it's somewhat actually the opposite. I think they feel like their time is of the essence, and they're scrambling to try and get their goals accomplished. I also think that when you, as you describe this hierarchy, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I'm not one of those people who thinks that there's like one Godhead. I actually think that there are various groups, and there's many occult organizations. There are many of these dynastic families. The oligarchy isn't necessarily just a one group, and I think that they're all competing for power. I think that oftentimes it tends to look like the locus is a very centralized, and I think it looks that way because they will align with each other, and they'll work together when it behooves them. So, the old adage, like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so, when it serves them to do so, they will work together because they will advance the agenda much more powerfully and smoothly if they work together. But they're still competing for power. And so I actually think that that's a little bit encouraging. That's some optimism, is the fact that they are competing, and because they're competing, they're it's not always as seamless as it may appear to the serfs below. I will also say that, of their own words, and this is, of course, much lower, more like middle management, but when you read the documents of just like the UN, for example, they say very clearly that they're behind schedule. This is part of their scramble with the Summit of the Future in September. It's based on our common agenda. This is where they're going to be voting on their global digital compact. And they say that they are very behind on Agenda 2030, and they want to make major headway to catch up. And they say in particular that the United States has been a big thorn in their side, and that has been very difficult for them to accomplish their Agenda 2030 goals. And of course, they're already laying out their 45, 55, and Agenda 75, which is really what our common agenda is about, the 2075 plan. But they say
it sounds like a fundraising pitch to me. Because I mean, look at what's actually occurred in the last 4 years, and look at what is right around the corner, especially if Trump gets reelected, in terms of checking off those 2030 goals. Trump's most out in the open benefactor in this moment is Elon Musk. It's not Sheldon Adelson's widow. She threw her $100 million in, and that's what she's throwing in. Elon Musk is promising $45 million a month. He's going to be a bigger donor.
Back down. He's now saying it's only 40 million, but
Well, yeah, whatever. But I mean, no. I mean, it's sure, 20 million less than he could have got, but now Elon's buddies are in on it, so that 20 million that he doesn't have to spend turned into an additional 80 million from his buddies.
Well, this is all, in my opinion, this is all about JD Vance. This was a deal to pick JD Vance, who is a Peter Thiel.
The PayPal mafia is going to run the country.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it comes down to. JD Vance is a wholly owned subsidiary. He's Peter Thiel's golf glove. That's what I've been calling him.
And he's also an integralist, so he's all in with all the Christian nationalists and the integralist interfaith movement. And so he serves both of the goals, to get the one world religion, the one world government. Yeah.
Well, and he looks like he was the original bass player for My Morning Jacket, which is absolutely hysterical. It's just, it's a character flaw. We're not here to judge, but just ease up on the makeup, buddy.
And he's a Yaley, so I can't prove it, but I suspect he might be,
But my point to that, though, is that the PayPal mafia represents the digital infrastructure and the physical infrastructure for that digital prison grid. Peter Thiel already has all of everybody's health information from back during COVID. His acolyte and Palmer Luckey and Anduril is going to help complete a lot of the software end of the digital prison infrastructure. Trump wants the Israeli smart wall at the border. So there's going to be Unit 8200 and Peter Thiel related contracts to complete the Zionist smart wall at the border. There's with Elon Musk, you've got obviously Starlink, but then whatever the military version of that, the Intel version, there's that's going up every time, every day as well. Musk did not get chastised by Benjamin Netanyahu for providing Starlink internet to Gaza's 1 or 2 working hospitals. He did not get chastised for that. You would think that the Israelis would be out in front saying, no, you can't do that, except for now they have all of the existing physical location and health information of everyone who has survived this and left that hospital. You think Elon Musk and Starlink don't sell that data?
Next, we have this clip from the Ripple Effect podcast with host Ricky Verandas and his guests Mark Marash and Matt Raymer.
Now, I know this is a little off topic, but I'm just curious because of your background. Have you looked into like 0 point energy or, are you a big Tesla guy or, are you into that type of stuff?
I'm not a huge Tesla guy, but I've actually got a really good friend who has some theories on 0 point energy. It was a previous effort of mine was I co-founded a rocket engine company called Frontier Astronautics. It's still operating out of my friend's missile silo in Wyoming. And my friend there actually has some really good theories that would be fun to try out someday to basically get massless. When you do propulsion to go one way, you throw something the other way. Well, with 0 point energy field, I believe you could probably actually pull yourself through space and not use any reaction mass, which means your delta V, as long as you can find energy, your delta V could be infinite. So that's maybe kind of a crazy topic, but the thing is that I think there's truth to it. And there's a great book by, what was his name? Is a gentleman named Cook wrote a great book called The Hunt for 0 Point. Highly recommend it. Great read.
And don't you think that that's relevant actually to what we're talking about?
It is, because people need to be able to share their ideas. They need to not be shut down when they bring up something that's out of the ordinary. Something that sounds crazy to people shouldn't get them shut up, because we don't know what crazy theories might actually be real. In the past few years, we've had a lot of that proven to us, haven't we?
Indeed.
Yeah,
in spades.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, years ago, I had one of the automotive engineers on my show from the documentary Pump. It's a very good documentary about the history of, alternative energy in regards to cars, how the electric car was. It's funny how like things change in time, because the electric car for a long time was suppressed, and then now it's being force fed to us, so it's like it's done a complete 360. But you also spoke about diesel engines. Diesel engines weren't designed to run off diesel fuel. With like very few modifications, you can get it to run off vegetable oil and peanut oil and whatnot. And it's all about planned obsolescence and controlling the energy. And you see a lot of that, the light bulb conspiracy. The idea that the light bulbs kept lasting longer and longer and longer, and then eventually all the big companies got together and like, hey, we need to limit the life of a light bulb. And there is a good documentary called Planned Obsolescence. I believe it's called Planned Obsolescence, the light bulb conspiracy, that goes into this topic and others. But Pump is a great one about the automotive industry. Who Killed the Electric Car was a good one. Gasland was another one. And then there's also I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Y Files on YouTube. It's a decent channel.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And let me see if I can pop it up. So they did a good video right here called Killer Patents, Secret Science, Free Energy, Anti-Gravity Cover-Ups. And he actually, weirdly enough, the guy AJ who hosts the show, because I'm always, I like to do research on people and find out more. Like, he was on the Rogan podcast years ago because he started, I think it's called Speedweed. It was like a company. It was like back, like when Rogan first started his podcast, he was on to promote his weed company, which delivering weed in California or something like that. It was something along those lines. And then all of a sudden, I run into this YouTube channel, and I'm like, why does this guy kind of looks familiar? I don't know who he is, but he has some really interesting stuff. Like, as you can tell, like Tesla knew the secret's great pyramids, unlimited energy to power. Like, so a bunch of really interesting topics and whatnot. And now he does this. And but in that video, it's a really good one. It goes through all the stories of people who figured out all these methods of 0 point energy or alternative energy for cars. Like the guy, I forget what his name was, the one who figured out how you could just put water. It basically was a fuel cell engine, put water in this like vehicle, and it would just, you could use tap water, you could use any type of water you want, throw it in there, and it would run. And eventually he killed himself, committed suicide or something like that. And just like
suicided.
Yes. Like Corbett says. And it's like story after story after story of every time there's somebody who figures out a way of, basically taking some money away from the big corporate industries, then something mysterious happens. And similar with the car industry, that and gas hole in that documentary, Pump, and in that video I just showed you from the Y files, all document quite a few people who figured out a way to get like 200 miles per gallon on like, some carbureted engine, some small modification that led to that. And then their technology was suppressed or bought and hidden. So speaking of censorship, like throughout history, not just content, but like information technology had been censored and controlled. So now you see it with content, it's no different. It's always about the elite trying to control stuff. In regards to censorship, is there any content that you like watch or listen to or enjoy that was censored that you feel like, maybe motivated you a little bit? Because I know a lot of us, like I know Matt, for example, like he listened to and watched and was a fan of a lot of the shows that were being censored. And I'm sure that was a motivator to like, hey, help these content creators out. Did you have a similar story?
I don't have a whole lot. I will say that over the past 4 years, during the whole COVID thing, we've seen a lot of people get canceled and censored, and I found that really despicable. And that is a part of what drove me in this direction, because I realized that these technologies kept popping up. I kept running across these technologies and going, wow, that would make somebody impossible to delete, impossible to censor. And why isn't somebody talking about this? There are all kinds of people talking about adjacent technologies like privacy and that sort of thing, but I wasn't seeing anybody really talking about what technologies are there that could be used. And just because I keep seeing these things pop up, I thought we need to start looking at those and seeing what we can do with them. So that is a part of it. And some of the things I have seen censored have been, a bunch of channels got taken off YouTube. Corbett got kicked off YouTube, right? Tom Woods got kicked off YouTube.
I got kicked off YouTube. I got kicked off YouTube.
That's how you know.
Yeah, well, and the only reason I wasn't stressed about it was because I honestly was working with Matt. So I knew that, like, hey, if I get kicked off YouTube, the show's being uploaded to all these other platforms. So I know that it's safe and people can reach it if it's not on YouTube. What I didn't know when I got kicked off YouTube, I had a hunch, but I didn't realize how drastic they were with their censorship, was when I got kicked off YouTube, they also started censoring me on Google because it's the same company. So, for example, Google does a really good job of when my awful spelling comes into play and I'm trying to find something to figure out what I'm spelling, right? And they're like really good at like, okay, do you mean this? These are suggestions to what you might be looking for. I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I meant. I spelled that completely wrong. But with my podcast, people would talk about like, hey, did you do a show on the NSA spying? Like, yeah, I got an episode I did with Thomas Drake. Let me send it to you. I'll go on Google on my phone. I'll be like, okay, the Ripple Effect podcast. I put the exact number, the exact guest, and it wouldn't come up. And I'm like, how can that be? It literally will find things I'm looking for even when I spell it wrong. And yet I'm putting all the exact information and it wasn't coming up anymore. And this happened right after I got kicked off YouTube. Same thing with COVID, right? So it's like, hey, do you know anything about this? Yeah, I had Brooke Jackson on, the Pfizer whistleblower. Let me, who was part of the COVID vaccine studies. Let me send it to you. Go on Google, can't find it. Oh yeah, I had Dr. Peter McCullough on. Let me say, can't find it. And it would happen over, and I'm like, how can this be? And then, I started doing some research and finding out that like it was a common theme. Like when you got censored off YouTube, it wasn't just YouTube. It wasn't just that platform. It's almost like the whole internet has now blackballed you, because Google controls the search engines and, and literally that becomes like one of the biggest issues is the fact that the two biggest search engines are Google and YouTube, and those are two ones censoring you. So it almost becomes impossible to find your stuff. And I know people have issues with like Peter Thiel and Rumble and some of these other platforms, but as long as I can use them, I'll use them. I mean, I'm on Band.video. I know initially there's some people who are like, oh, you're on Alex Jones's, platform. I'm like, the way I look at it is whatever issues you have with any platform, if it's Band.video, if it's Twitter, if it's whatever, like until I directly have an issue with it or they censor me, I'm going to use them. If they're available, I'm going to, and honestly, if YouTube didn't kick me off, I'd still use YouTube. I would use it because there are always going to be people that that are on those platforms or exclusively on those platforms that you need to reach. So any tool I can use to try to reach people, I'll use. But yeah. So where was I going with this? I'm sure I had a question in there somewhere. What were we just talking about before that long rant? I can't remember.
You were asking his origin story.
Oh yeah. What was it that I saw that got censored? Maybe that got drove me in that direction.
Yeah.
But I think I kind of answered that.
So in regards to this technology, this is where I was going with that. Because of this, how all the tech companies collude together, right? Like you saw what happened to Trump. He didn't just get censored on one platform. He got censored on all of them at the same time. Alex Jones, same thing. He didn't just get censored on one platform. He got censored on all the platforms at once. Is that an issue, the fact that they all actually collude together? And like how do you fight back against them like that? And when you're talking about anti-censorship, are you talking about brand new platforms where these platforms aren't even going to be used? Or do you mean like find a way to not get censored on the mainstream platforms?
Wow, you're hitting all my talking points for me. That's awesome. Well, so obviously the first thing you do, right, when you're on these centralized platforms where you're fragile, you've got all this time invested in creating, editing, uploading all these videos, right? And you're fragile because you can get taken down. But these big tech platforms like YouTube, they call the shots, right? Because they've got the eyeballs looking at the screen. And so the first step is to move to those alternative platforms, some of which you've mentioned, I think, but things like BitChute, Rumble, X, etc. But like you said, there can be coordinated attacks where they take you down on all of them, and some of them have made a point out of being censorship resistant. Both X and Rumble claim that right now. But here's the deal: we don't know what types of pressures might be put on those people by advertisers, government, other actors to say, well, we wouldn't want anything happen to your servers, and get leaned on. The next thing you know, I mean, you wouldn't want to get a big audit on your taxes, would you? And so next thing you know, I mean, they may be taking people down as well. So we really have to look at some of these platforms that are truly decentralized, and some of those would be so yeah, I found it here someplace. I got a list. But but some of them are like one of the technologies, and it's not really a platform, but the interplanetary file system is something we'll be talking about shortly. IPFS. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah,
but then there's
would talk about it all the time. He was the first time he would he was the first person I would hear mention it and refer.
Oh, good.
And eventually that's why he came on the Union Doesn't Wanted, because it was kind of a new idea and he wanted to get it out there and let everybody know what it was about. And it seemed like he was also working, I don't know if he still is, but like kind of not just for video and content, but also for websites, like a similar type of technology where like your website exists on a, similar type of platform where it can't be directly banned or censored or blocked or whatnot. So for people listening, what is it for, if just
Sure.
the overview?
Sure. It's like torrent on steroids. Basically what IPFS does is think of it as a file sharing system more than anything else. What happens is you post your content, what have you. You could post any type of file you want onto IPFS. And what happens is that it gets assigned a content identifier, and anybody who has that content identifier can find your content as long as somebody on the network still has it. So rather than being an address that tells you where to go to get it, what happens, the content identifier is a hash and some other information put together that basically uniquely identifies that file. And as long as somebody has it, you'll be able to reach it. So when your stuff gets spread across IPFS, it is damn near uncensorable, because they would have to take down every single node that has that data on it.
Now, we have a great clip from a large panel discussion from independent media members hosted by Derrick Broze exposing the two-party illusion.
Hey everyone, this is Derrick Broze with the Conscious Resistance Network, and I'm joined by James Corbett of the Corbett Report, Dan Dix of Press for Truth, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media, Ryan Cristian of The Last American Vagabond, and Aaron Melissa of Truthstream News. All people you should know by now, and if not, hopefully you'll follow their work after this. So we're getting together for a discussion because, well, first off, between all of us here, we've just doing the math. We've got about 80 years or so of independent media experience, activism, journalism, content creation. And each of these people here I respect. And if you follow their work or have followed their work, you'll see that they have been consistent through one administration in the United States and in Canada and elsewhere, and not falling for the garbage, looking at the bigger picture and, just staying consistent in that message. And I don't know about you guys, but when I started waking up and I found James and I found Dan and others, it seemed like to me, everybody at the time got it. Like, okay, Bush did this, and then Obama came in, he did the same thing. Okay, two-party system's a lie. And then this thing called Trump came along and broke a lot of people's brains. And we've been dealing with the situation now for almost 8 years, where there's people in our broader conspiracy realist, freedom movement, truth movement, whatever you want to say, who seem to have fallen hard for what I call the Trump deception. And after this recent assassination attempt, whatever it was, we're seeing that go to new levels, like people, comparing Trump to being chosen by God or Jesus or something like this. And that, in addition to things like Elon Musk and others, I just see so much propaganda that feels like at levels that we've never had before. And I wanted to get us all together to see if maybe we can pull apart some of this stuff and shine some light into this for those who are following along and scratching their heads and wondering what the heck is going on. So yeah, I know I said a lot, but that's kind of where I want to start. Anybody who wants to chime in, like, generally speaking, are you guys seeing what I'm seeing? Are you seeing more propaganda, more people falling for the same old narratives, whether it's American politics or Canadian politics or any of the above?
Yeah, it's a new narrative network. I mean, you had before CNN versus Fox News for the controlled opposition. Now you have mainstream media and alternative media. To be honest about what's happening right now, most people don't even realize they're in on it. I mean, most people are just going along with the new narrative, and because it makes them feel comfortable, or maybe it's an opportunism and they get more money or viewership or whatever it might be. But we're definitely seeing it because suddenly we have a uniform independent media that is not really quite independent. They're going, well, if Biden is bad, Trump must be good, or RFK Jr. must be good. And of course, we're seeing that right now when we're seeing the narrative push for civil war that we're seeing in the United States and in the UK right now. It's this side or the other. And I think that has become a major problem among independent medias alike. And most of them basically being interconnected. It's like a promotion campaign between these guys that are at the top of independent media and get promoted at the top of algorithms on every website, like mainstream media does on YouTube.
Well, I'll jump in. First, I just want to say I'm, honored to be here with all you guys. I mean, I'm easily the lowest guy in the totem pole in this crowd, so I'm happy to be here with all you. I think I agree. It's really interesting to see how this is all playing out, because as I like to take, I think David Icke, coined the kind of mainstream alternative media framing of that, and I really see that as kind of the culprit in all this. I mean, obviously, I agree with Josh. There's people that have good intentions that just don't realize that they're kind of falling into that trap. But the real culprit for me are the people that seem to, I think you even are where I got this term from, Derrick, the team sport politics, where it has nothing to do with the actual truth, the outcome. It's just about winning. right? It's about beating the other side, about achieving certain ends, and even lying for that, your truth or how you see it. But it's different than it has been, at least in my experience, for a very long time, where it is suddenly this fever pitch of people that are, like you said, about Trump is suddenly sent by God, or different overlaps that this is meant to overtake everything. And it's very alarming to see, because I think a lot of good people who just want change are being taken advantage of. And that's always how that kind of plays, where they lean into your desperation. They manufacture that to achieve that end. And yeah, I mean, I think this is bigger than anything we've dealt with before, frankly. And if we can get into it, I see it stemming from outside this country, but I think it's not really an unpopular, it's a common opinion, but where, I think, is the interesting point. But I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I guess I can chime in. I think you can track this thing back a long time to pretty much back when we all began. You mentioned, we got a lot of years of experience between us. And back in around 2005, 2006, when we were all started getting going, there was something happening in the field of alternative media. There was a massive awakening happening. There were people becoming libertarian-minded, anarchist-minded. It was almost, freedom was in the air, essentially. And I remember when all of a sudden, I felt that this was posing a problem for the powers that ought not be, but all of a sudden, Ron Paul came around, and everybody who was into this freedom movement and this guy who's championing for, end the Fed, had everybody getting behind him. And I think the powers that ought not be saw this as a potential issue. And in comes the reality TV star, Donald Trump, the populist movement man, to kind of harness that energy and to funnel that energy that was happening at the time into a direction that's going to be more steerable, more easily controlled. Back then we were all talking about the false left right paradigm a lot, and not about making America great again, but about essentially dissolving the union and moving towards secession and moving towards decentralization. And with Trump coming on board, he's managed to miraculously flip that on its head completely. And everybody's fallen right back in line to the false left right paradigm. And maybe, as you said in the beginning, it takes people outside of that a cult of statism, a couple of Canadians, some people in Mexico, maybe people who aren't surrounded by all of that to see it for what it truly is. But I mean, I'm after watching cycle after cycle, it's phenomenal to me that people can't see what it really is. I mean, look at Kerry and Bush. Like, when that happened, I was like, it's blatantly obvious now. You got two guys from the same secret society, Skull and Bones, little tiny Yale University, and they're running against each other for president. I thought that was like, okay, it's pretty obvious what's going on now. But miraculously, Trump has managed to undo everything. And that's why I think this is an important conversation to have, so we can undo the damage that's been done.
Dan, you just hit on something that I've been thinking about recently, because when I first got into this, as people may or may not know, of course, I was a well-indoctrinated statist coming from that paradigm. So, the answer is vote third party, guys. We just need some kind of maverick outsider in the political system, whatever, all that garbage. As people know, I've drifted away from the most dangerous superstition and towards reality. So I no longer put my faith in, hey, guys, vote harder this time. But in that time of the last decade or so of me realizing political reality and coming to that realization, it became more and more and more and more shocking to me. How could people, I get 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, it's your first time ever voting in an election. Ooh, you've been indoctrinated your whole life. It's your big civic duty. It's going to change the world, all that nonsense. Okay, I get it. But I've been increasingly flabbergasted by people who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, people who have voted dozens of times by this point, who still believe that this is going to do anything. And I've been making that point for years now. How many times do you have to get suckered before you realize what is really happening here? But now it's flipped again. And I realize, no, the joke is on me again. For me, expecting that people who have been doing this over and over and over and over and over again their entire life are going to do something different this time. No, they're going to do it again and again and again and again. And they're going to go back for more every single time. And I think I have to accept that fact. Yep. A lot of people are not going to accept political reality. They're going to keep going and voting for, which Santa Claus should run Christmas. Okay, great, guys. Go have your wonderful little party. Do your little once every 4-year ritual. It'll make you feel better for that day, whatever, or it'll make you feel terrible the next day,
They
whatever it
get a
is.
sticker. They get an I voted sticker. It's very important.
Exactly. Oh, doesn't it feel so good? But no, okay, go do that. But my message now would be, okay, I don't care. I genuinely don't care, because your vote means nothing. It doesn't matter. It won't be counted, and it doesn't mean anything anyway. But if I could just ask those people out there who are so committed, yeah, I'm a statist, I'm going to vote, all that, spend 1/10 the amount of time, energy, and passion that you put into voting and the team politics, sport garbage. If you put 1/10 of your time and passion of that into, I don't know, a community garden or literally anything else actually in the real world, great. That's something we can work towards, because I don't think this conversation is fundamentally going to change anyone's mind. But if we could just get people pointed in a direction of action, I think that would be an accomplishment.
Well, I was just going to say, I've never been as disturbed by what's going on in a political election as I have in this one. I mean, it's like you either have Trump is Hitler. So I guess they call that Trump derangement syndrome. So it's either Trump is Hitler, totally Hitler, or Trump is divine. He's coming down to us from God. Jesus is helping him sign bills. Like, those are the two options, and there's not a lot of in between going on with that. And that is terrifying to me, because either road that goes down is not good. We're not in a good place. And I mean, I put up a video back in 2015, I think, just showing all the connections with Trump, his whole career of things. And I still get comments to this day, and they all say the same thing. This didn't age well. And it's like, this is true. This is all true stuff about this man. Like, how did it not age well? It's just the truth. You're overlooking it. And when you try to point it out, then people say things like, well, he was tricked, he was, because he went on and on about draining the swamp. I remember this being like his whole thing. I'm going to drain the swamp. If you're like, drain the swamp, And then he just literally filled up the swamp with every swamp creature. Like, John Bolton was freaking in there. It's just like Rothschild bankers are in there. And I'm going, this is the swampiest swamp I've maybe ever seen in my life. And then they're like, well, he got tricked. That's what it was. He just got tricked. He's tricked by all his advisors. Like, so you're going to vote for the guy who got tricked because he won't get tricked again. That sounds really awesome. That'll be good for you. Like, it blows my mind. And then on the other side, you have, on the other side, I'm sorry, I can't believe what's going on right now. I really still can't wrap my mind around it, even after doing this for all of these years. But on the other side, you have a woman who literally sounds like she showed up to school late and forgot what the assignment was every time she talks. And she's just like saying stuff. And then she's surprised by what she's saying out of her own mouth. And after, like, I don't know how many years they've been saying, we're going to save democracy. We're saving democracy. Joe Biden, every other 5 minutes, a vote for us is a vote for democracy and all this stuff, right? Then it's like, they just get him out of there and put her in there. Not a single I've won as many primaries as this woman. So, like, it's no good choices. It feels to me like and maybe this is how it's always been, and I'm just naive. Even at this age, I'm still just shocked by things. You think you won't get shocked, but I feel like I just keep getting shocked. But, we get to this point where it just feels like I've never before seen so transparently what seems like two elite factions just warring with each other behind a scapegoat. And that's it. And it just feels so obvious to me. And I'll stop talking. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm going on and on now, but
don't stop.
No, it's your turn now.
I don't know what to say. I'm actually kind of nervous. I don't know
Aaron,
what to
you've
add.
been here the longest. You've been in this like for probably the longest, right? So, I mean, have you seen anything to this level of whether you call it psychological operations or divide and conquer? Like, do you feel it's the same old thing, or is this something new?
I feel like in some ways I've been in this since I was knee high, because my dad kind of instructed me on civics and American pride, and like, oh, Thomas Jefferson, what party was he in? And my family is Republican, so he was a Democrat. He must have been terrible, but because I fell for that when I was young, I got wise to it a few years later, and thought more deeply about it. And, it's been a progression with me and hopefully everybody. But yeah, there were so many people, as Dan mentioned, as most of you know, who woke up to the false two-party paradigm. So how did so many people get sucked back into it? That part floors me. And it's just frustrating how much energy gets sucked out every cycle with this stuff. I try to look away and it just pulls you in like a tractor beam.
It's like a train wreck.
But over the years, you see potentially good candidates get cast away for no good reason at all. You see completely skewed primaries. The stuff with Ron Paul and Bernie Sanders, just set aside what they stand for or maybe stand for. The procedure was ridiculous and would be illegal if there were real laws behind these elections. But when you get right down to it, it's private parties who organize these elections, and it's more like tradition than anything binding, except that when we vote, and if you look at the words, you go to the dictionary, you look to the old meanings, the etymology, voting is a wish. It's closely related to votary offerings, and people get on board with the issues that they want to be for, that they believe in, that they project these candidates represent. And then you get all the other garbage they're actually going to do and the people they've made promises to. And you're actually giving your consent to that. And that's what bothers me the most. I mean, of course, it's pretty futile voting, especially if you live in the United States in a populous state. Here in Texas, I mean, there's almost no point most of the time. I mean, as far as the number of your actual vote. But besides that, the giving of consent really troubles me, I think. So I doubt I'm saying anything you all don't know, but,
Can I add one more thing, Derrick? I think just one thing I think is important, like the overarching thing to all this, I'm sure, to some degree we agree on, or even just the idea of whether your vote even translates to the outcome. I'm probably similar, feeling in this group. But I want to just consider, because I'm agreeing with most everything we're talking about, that we're seeing this kind of unprecedented time where people are kind of being pulled back into that. But I also kind of want to overlap that or overshadow, or, just kind of talk about at the same time, or ask whether or not that is actually the big picture. Like, I wonder whether or not we're seeing more people than ever pull away from this. And at the same time, like a resurgence of people falling into it, like almost at the same time. Because I feel like why a lot of this might be happening, and maybe it's a little bit of wishful thinking, but that people are seeing through this at such a crazy level from different angles, whether it's just because of what Israel did or during COVID-19, or they kind of shook people out of this, that now that's why it's as crazy as it is. You know what I mean? A little bit of both sides. Just want to kind of think about that as we go through that, because I wonder that.
I definitely think more people have woken up. I think we would all agree since COVID in some ways. But to me, it's like, waking up is one part of the process. But then if a couple of years later you vote, it's like, oh, the election's up. Let me forget about all the ways that I learned about Epstein and I learned about all these things. But now I'm going to go vote and imagine that's going to fix this corrupted system. And I do want to get back to what James was touching on earlier, like how people can spend their energy better ways. But one thing that comes to mind in terms of this being unprecedented, I feel like we can't have this conversation we don't have to get super deep into it, but just to me, it is part of the problem we're discussing here. And that is whatever you want to call QAnon. Like, I do think it was some type of psychological operation. We don't all have to share our theories necessarily, but I think that was a major point in getting so many people, and maybe a certain mindset or a certain subsect of the freedom community that like to solve puzzles and whatever, it was drawn to that. But things like that in a major way, to what Melissa was saying a moment ago, that like people say, oh, no, he's just trying to keep his friends closer. Look at this Q post. It claimed this thing, or, no, he's putting those people in positions like Bolton to expose them. He's letting them expose themselves, all these kinds of things. There's so many, like, I guess, mind traps, you could say, or whatever, that people have fallen into. And I see the same thing with what you mentioned, Melissa, about your video. Like, I put out articles and stuff over the years, facts about Trump, and people won't even deal with them. They won't even contend with them, let alone try to debunk them. They just like, no, that's fake news. So yeah, any thoughts on that, how the QAnon, whatever it is, and just the things we've seen over the last 7-8 years have sort of paved the way for what we're dealing with now, where people don't even want to deal with reality? I mean, I guess this was the CIA's goal, right? Keeping people from being able to tell truth from fiction.
Well, Derrick, I mean, one of the things I find amazing is that there are still QAnon people that exist today. I mean, they say we got to trust the plan, sit on our hands, wait for it. They're doing things behind closed doors. It's all good. Well, first, they've injected millions of children with deadly injections that are killing them at a record rate. So if we're just waiting on that, that's kind of crazy. Killing hundreds of thousands of people overseas, poisoning the food supply, doing all this kind of stuff. What are we waiting for at this point after, 9 years of QAnon now? I mean, it's absurd. absurd. But of course, that is how these psyops work, both in mainstream and alternative media. They have the controlled opposing factors that both keep people apathetic perpetually. And I mean, I know, Aaron, you were heavily involved in the Obama deception years ago, which was a kind of a renaissance at that time in independent media for, hey, we're talking about the left-right paradigm. It's great. I thought things were really going to shift around that time. I was wrong because, of course, you jiggle some keys in front of a baby and they'll get distracted. What we've seen is we've moved into this new version of independent media or alternative knowledge, where even that in itself has been hijacked, and we had to expect that to happen if we are in any way successful in what we've been trying to do. They will shift it, and it's a limited hangout, tell part of the truth, but not the entirety of the truth, to distract people from the entirety of the truth. QAnon was a major part of that. We're seeing that today at an even more advanced scale with what we're seeing, for example, after the Trump assassination attempt, or whatever you want to call it. I haven't seen a scratch on his ear, but I'll put it this way. When we have something like that happen, even if he was to die, it would cause civil war, which is what they want for a reset. If he was to live, then there would be hero worship. And the two most dangerous things in politics is hero worship and demoralization. We have weakness on one side and the strong man on the other side that will lead the people in the wrong direction. And that is always the case. They always set up the story. The Tavistock Institute back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s would plant stories in the news to manipulate people's minds, completely fake stories, to see how people would react to them. And then they could come out with a plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G for down the road, what they can do to manipulate people in different ways psychologically. And if it was plan F, well, they have a plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G, a web coming from each one of these plans. This is how they can perpetually ensure that they can mislead people or pull people in the wrong direction. We see that with the attempt for civil war in the UK right now, where we have basically Israeli-funded protests on one side and the migrants that were shipped in because of attacks on the Middle East over the years and welfare state and all this kind of stuff, which Israel was heavily involved in, as they brag about. So now you have clashing factions, and you have people like Tommy Robinson and all these other fakes that are pushing this agenda forward. And people will say to me, well, then what's the solution? We can't just do nothing. Well, voting and sitting on your hands is doing nothing. Burning down cities so that the system wins is doing nothing. What's actually doing something is less convenient, so no one wants to do it because tyranny comes under the guise of convenience. So to actually win this battle for humanity, it doesn't involve voting for the system, to have a new plantation owner to do the same thing over again to you. It is to withdraw from the system as much as you can. Instead of sitting on your hands, be independent. Freedom isn't something you hold in your hands. You are free or you are not. It depends on your own decision making. So if you want to be free, you have to be independent. You can't be dependent on grocery stores, on banks, and all these things. But people don't want those solutions because they prefer to be angry instead of take those steps to do the more inconvenient things that will lead them to a better life going forward. So we are kind of stuck in this circle where people say the only solution is the same solution we tried last time, which leads to the problem. And then boom, we're in another circle. It's perpetual. And that's why the political system has existed in some form like we see today for thousands of years, and no one's learned from it. It's just dependence. It's laziness. It's convenience.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. I think one long-term issue, which I'm happy to talk about, I don't know how to solve it, is how much power we've put in the executive. The idea that we're fighting over what flavor of dictator we're going to have, rather than why the executive and all its many branches would be even allowed to do half of the things they do, of course. But yeah, you mentioned the Obama deception years. From my perception, from everything I knew, there was a pretty broad base of both left and right, middle leaning, pretty solid, wide spread of ground of people who were pretty well tired of the system, seeing through it, largely anti-Bush, but I don't think it stopped with Bush. I think it was really people ready to look further. I know Dan, I know James, Derrick, we've all been in the area of studying who's behind the throne, the people connected to it, the secret meetings, the list of names and stuff. And I think that was at least a healthier ground to dig into the details. And somehow they pulled everyone back away from that. And I mean, I know more than I could say behind the scenes of how certain deals went down and how movements got bought out, but things happen. Let's just put it that way. And it's astounding. It's astounding.
One of these days, we're going to have to hear that story, Aaron.
Well, also, you mentioned Q. I thought Q was very fascinating to watch because at a time when they were trying to shut down speech, especially during COVID, having to do with, the gene therapies and everything, they were actually releasing kind of almost a training program to think conspiratorially while everybody was at home. So it got a whole lot of people, especially I noticed in the older generations who don't normally think that way, to think that way, which I found very fascinating because why would they want to do that? But then it's like they got trapped there. I mean, there's still people writing me like, he's going to lock her up. I'm like, how many years has it been? Are you in a David Lynch loop right now? You think he's going to lock her up? Like, he went on television right after he won and he said, I'm not locking her up. She's great people. I mean, they've been friends for 30 years. He's not locking anybody up. Like, that's ridiculous. But they still think this, right? They ran that thing like an augmented reality game. This is something that Silicon Valley does. They have a lot of these augmented reality games, and that's basically what I feel like Q is, except it has taken over some people's minds with such efficiency that it's actually quite frightening. But also, I think that lends to a larger discussion of why are we seeing like these levels of hero worship? Because I mean, even during Obama, and back in the day when Obama first came up, I was still politically I was watching The Daily Show. I was very left-leaning, liberal, I guess, or whatever. Not even really. I actually didn't care. I just watched The Daily Show because I thought Jon Stewart was funny. And I was like, oh, cool. We're going to have our first Black president, awesome. And even then, though, I don't remember this level of hero worship. There weren't people driving around with giant flags. I saw somebody that painted their house like an American flag and put a 15-foot tall Trump cutout in their yard. There are people around my neighborhood who have painted furniture in their yards with his name on it. I mean, it's a level we haven't seen, and I think maybe what people are taking for granted, or maybe just haven't thought about, is just how efficient all of this social media and technology has gotten in mirroring back to people things they want to think and feel about stuff. Because that is a way to really get to know what to tell people in politics now, is they can get all this data from social media. They can harvest all that stuff. They can compound it in so many different ways. It's insane. And then they can just say that back to people, just mirror back what they know their voter base wants and doesn't want in a way that we've never seen before. At least not anytime in like the 20th century or anything, not in these ways. It used to be, it had to be polls. They don't really need to do polls anymore. And you have Klaus Schwab coming out at WEF saying something like, in the future, we're not even going to have elections because we'll just be able to know what you're thinking, because they have all these algorithms now to a level that they're supposed to know you better than you know yourself. So, I mean, we're getting to a place where I don't even know how much longer this particular system is going to be able to hang on. And I think there's a lot of people who are really freaked out by that as well. Anything changing, right? After COVID, especially, they're like, I'm going to hang on to normal. I'm going to pretend like Joe Biden is normal for as long as possible. And it's like, he's obviously not okay. If your grandma was acting like this, you would be worried and concerned. This is our president, and you're acting like you don't see a problem with the things that are going. He's talking to air. There's nobody there. Like, he can't finish a sentence, and you're acting like you don't recognize that, and they're just, I've had people write me and say, people are just so scared of anything changing, anything else changing, that they will hold on to whatever this system is as it's like the Titanic sinking. They will be playing a violin on, just, they don't care. They don't want any, they're too afraid to even think about an alternative. So they will vote for the lesser of two evils or evil all day or whatever, because they're too scared to even think about anything being any different.
Yeah, I want to make sure everyone has a chance to talk. It's 15 seconds. Something that Melissa said that really stands out there that I really think is important. She mentioned Klaus Schwab saying in the future, you will know who you want to vote for. You don't have to actually vote. This is something that the mainstream alternative media, as David Icke calls it, has been doing with Javier Milei, the Israel supporting, Paris Climate Accord signing, so-called anarchist, who is now a hero of alternative media and is now rolling out a system so that they can predict crimes ahead of time and arrest culprits before they commit the crime. So this is the post-truth inverted world that we live in. And I just think it's interesting how people always fall for those fake alternatives, and we're seeing that right now across the board. Geert Wilders, Javier Milei, it goes on.
It's okay. Josh, thank you for expanding this conversation back a little bit when you mentioned Tavistock in the 50s and stuff, because yeah, we can go back to 2008 or whatever, but no, let's go further back, because this is part of a plan. It's been written out, openly talked about. There's no conspiracy theorizing involved here. Just grab a book. They've written about this. They've talked about it. Tragedy and Hope, page 1247. The chief problem of American political life for a long time has been how to make the two congressional parties more national and international. The argument that the two parties should represent opposed ideals and policies, one perhaps to the right and the other of the left, is a foolish idea, acceptable only to doctrinaire and academic thinkers. They've been talking about this for over half a century at this point, laughing in the face of the suckers who get sucked into the political sideshow circus every 4 years. Pull the lever, that'll make your difference. And it doesn't matter. They admit it in their own words, their own writing, left, right, Democrat, Republican, Trump, Biden, Harris, whatever. It makes absolutely no difference whatsoever to the fundamental underlying agenda. They are laughing at you if you are the sucker who is going to pull that voting booth lever. I don't even know. I don't even know how it works, because I voted precisely once in my life, and I'm deeply ashamed of that. But anyway,
I'm proud to say I've never voted. I can chalk that. I am proud to say I have not yet once ever voted in my life. And, I think what we need to point out here is the system isn't broken. The system is fixed. And if we want to fundamentally talk about what the problem is, democracy essentially is the problem. And, that brings up an interesting conversation about what do you replace this with? Because if you look at where this came from, with the money changers who are responsible for not just pulling the strings of the puppets, but for the very concept of democracy in the first place, this was coming from a time of aristocracy, of monarchies, when there was a hereditary class that would essentially, inherit the land and pass it on to their children. We're not talking a term of 4 years or 8 years or 10, we're talking life. So things were different then. So I'm not necessarily saying we need to move back to monarchies, per se, but I think we need to focus on the issue that fundamentally democracy has been coerced into co-opted in becoming the illusion of choice. And unless we realize that, nobody's going to move forward. And then maybe once we realize that, we can start talking about what's something that can replace democracy. So long as it's not centralized, if you just have a centralized system replacing a centralized system, it's just going to continue. So I think we need to fundamentally recognize that democracy is the problem in the first place. Then we can start thinking about where we need to go from there.
I think this is where we are right now, though, and I agree completely. But I worry that this is what the powers that ought not be, I like that, are recognizing that we're getting to that point. That's how I see this. And that's my point from before, is I genuinely see more people in scattered ways, like definitely not seeing through the two-party illusion, or that voting doesn't have an effect, but seeing through certain big parts of these lies. And it's caused this kind of reaction that I think we all see in other discussions, but in a bigger way. This is like you briefly mentioned, like the post-truth world bullet point from the Bilderberg point. These kind of conversations are coming around that have been there for a long time. Casey and once Americans, everything they know is false, then our job will be done, or something like that. The paraphrasing of the CIA director is I think that's where this is getting to. Where I think that's what QAnon is. Or other elements I usually see kind of Russiagate as kind of like the counterbalance to that, is driving us to a position as Melissa pointed out, to where you are leaning into the conspiratorial, assumptive, perception on everything, which there's a level of that, as we all know, to research is, kind of questioning and asking things and leaning into it, but trapping them in this point where it's the team sport politics level, but you're leaning into the fairy tale of it all, which is kind of part of that narrative, is that's what they frame all of us as. And you end up in this position where you're getting deeper into this illusion, which they then point to justify that we need to reimagine everything. And that's so I'm with you that we definitely need a change, but I caution about falling into that same trap for the people in that paradigm, because they'll quickly see it once they're told to see it, and then they have the solution in the wings. And that's kind of where I see that going. And that's why I see both happening simultaneously. That's just kind of how I read it anyway, where it's, cause, but also a positive,
I want to just mention real quick, we were supposed to be joined by Whitney Webb tonight. She couldn't make it. But as far as Trump goes, and everybody here in this room is, I'm sure, well aware of this, but for those at home, if you support Trump and you've made it this far, it's worth reminding people that Trump's VP, Trump being supported in numerous ways. I just wrote an article about how that's crossing over with Rumble and the Bitcoin community. A lot of it's coming from Peter Thiel and people connected to the PayPal mafia. Now all the right-wing big tech bros getting behind Donald Trump, and because they're calling him the crypto president. There's things like that need to pay attention to, and more specifically why Peter Thiel matters, besides the whole Palantir surveillance, all seeing eye from the Lord of the Rings thing. He is, of course, continues to be a steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group. And I wrote about this in my latest article for TLAV, how on one hand, you've got the right-leaning, allegedly libertarian Peter Thiel connected to Palantir, PayPal mafia, big tech, et cetera, funding Trump's VP candidate and involved in Rumble, and a steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group. And on the other side, this is, I think, a good example of that dichotomy. You've got people like Eric Schmidt, formerly of Google, who is, we're told, more left-leaning, Democrat-leaning, and he finances to the tune of millions of dollars the other side, the Democratic Party. But he also is a steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group. So you've got Schmidt on one side coming from Bilderberg, Thiel from one side coming from Bilderberg, both of them funding each side. I don't think there's a more clear example of what we're dealing with.
Derrick, what you point out is actually, what Dan was pointing out, what Derrick is pointing out there is all of a piece, in that the point of the illusion of the left-right voting and all of that is to get people constantly invested in the system every 4 years so that they can continue to be drawn along in whatever direction they wish, right? So there always has to be a narrative that will play into whatever is happening at the time that will get people to believe in the system again. So, for example, back in 2008, it was hope and change, all of that. We saw it worked. Many people bought into that. In 2020, 2016, 2024, that ain't going to work anymore. So what they've got to sell is something that plays into growing conspiracy awareness. So we see QAnon, for example. QAnon, okay, well, maybe that was a bit ham-handed, but it worked well enough, back in the day. But now, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but here's the new version of that that's coming along that I've just heard being promoted by an independent media, mainstream alternative media personality. The recirculation of elites. So for people who don't know, this is a theory put out by the Italian philosopher Pareto back in the late 19th century, literally picked up on, literally used and cited and checked by Mussolini in his creation of actual fascism. I know we can't talk about fascism anymore because that word's been diluted, but no, like real deal, actual, true fascism relies on this theory. But anyway, the idea is there's always elites. There's always gonna be elites. It's essentially oligarchy is just a fact of life, guys. So what you want circulation of elites. You want them to change and war with each other so that, you can get, basically you want the better kind of elites, the ones that'll more or less leave you alone. You want those people in power. And I literally heard one of these independent media experts the other day saying, no, you don't get it. Larry Fink, yeah, bad guy. Jamie Dimon is our friend. It's literally getting to that point. Oh, Mark Andreessen is the good tech guy, is working these things in the back. And don't worry, guys, these are the guys who will more or less leave you alone, and they just want to do business. So they're the good kind of elites that we got to be rooting for. This is the new narrative. You're going to be hearing this more in the coming months. And if you buy it, God bless you. I don't know what else to say.
Let's take a look at some highlights from AM Wake Up from this week. Make sure to support and share their show to keep this great channel going. Share the show. Share the show. Share the show.
Share the fucking show.
With covered in fluid, nice and lubed up. Sometimes you get it'll scratch your eye, and oh my god, it's like holy shit, your eyeball is gonna burn out of your skull. But back then they were putting glass on their fucking eyeball. It's like holy shit.
Did you guys saw that Kamala Harris picked a feckless old white dude for her vice president, right?
Did you see
that?
Tim Walz from Minnesota, governor of Minnesota.
Interesting.
Very interesting with her being in Pennsylvania too tonight, and then she picked him.
Well, so I have to look more into the other guy in general, but it's an interesting shift because of all the focus on Shapiro and, you know, all the arguments that it's like, you know, it's always the same lazy, stupid things where people are highlighting, look, the guy supported Israel, he served in the IDF, and then the argument is you hate Jewish people. It's like, where the fuck is that? Like this game of just mashing these things together. It's talking about support for a government committing genocide. You fucking idiots, you know.
Well,
but it's weird. It became this whole conversation about how, you know, even though she's like blindly supporting Israel, that she's somehow anti-Semitic because they're going away from it. It's like this, you know, they're all just so cowed along by these kind of claims from Israel. So I have to look more at the other guy. Do you have any background on that, Steve?
He's the dude who basically let all of Minneapolis burn during the George Floyd. He went out there with a mask on and like in the middle of the street while they were doing like Black Lives Matter shit all over the place, wrote like "Justice Now" in a freaking crayon on the ground or some retarded shit.
Driver's licenses for all. He wants that nationwide, giving everybody. Doesn't matter if you're a citizen or not.
Let's
Is
see.
it digital or just talking about just, you know, that's probably what that has to do with.
It's
driver's
not,
license?
Yeah,
The
not
digital
only
aspect.
was he trying to push the digital aspect of it, there's a story in the doc that's like semi-related where Apple is going to be a verified, like on your phone, just your Apple Pass. That's your ID. So they're going for that now. Yeah, I mean, you can complain about the governor of any given state, but Minnesota has taken a distinctly like far
They
left
changed their
isn't
flag,
the right
man.
word. They have the Somali flag. He's been pushing all of the trans stuff. He signed off on puberty blockers for kids and shit like
He
that.
literally said the other night on what is it, white old dudes for Harris? I don't know. They've have comedians for Harris, drag for Harris, old white men for Harris,
cucks for
white
Harris.
dudes for Harris. where he said, you know, don't mistaken one socialism is another's neighborliness.
Yeah.
What was it?
What he said, one person's socialism is another person's neighborliness.
Let me pull it up.
Just being neighborly.
Well, I don't know what the context is, but like from an objective standpoint, you could argue that what the point would be is that there are people that are arguing from the right that any number of things that are not even remotely that are just, you know, it's just a broad catch-all socialism, communism kind of a game. The same thing with Venezuela. I don't know what he's saying, but I see that from a nonpartisan perspective, the ridiculousness of everything being socialism, communism that equals bad in the mind of the right, or on the other side, everything is Nazism or, you know, whatever. Like it's extreme, ridiculous concepts. You know that
God, I want to go pull this whole clip, but
the amount of government controlled, like comparatively for Venezuela, it's like a 13% difference in regard to how much the government controls. So we're really pretending that that 13% difference is communism versus democracy.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a very childish way to look at this stuff. All governments can lead to the same control. All of them.
Yeah.
Look
Is
how
it
we're living in
outgoing?
this country.
100%.
It's
But we can get out there, reach out, make the case. And for one thing, don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness. But
Yeah, that doesn't even make sense though. Like I feel like
now I
what
want to
he's
go
trying
get that
say-
whole clip, but I'd have to go through that whole stupid Zoom to get that shit. I want to go through that whole.
Well, if you can find them
Get
on
that whole
YouTube and then
clip.
search the transcript. That's usually the easiest way to grab something out. But yeah, I mean, it's who knows what he's trying to say. I mean, what the context is weird to say.
Now
I don't
he
even know what
did
he
give.
means by that.
He did give, you know, the schools in Minnesota, you know, free breakfast and lunch for all the kids that can't afford it. That's cool. I like that. But he also was, you know, there for this shit. This is crazy because this is America. It's when he refused to pull in the National Guard in Minneapolis.
Yeah, it's interesting though. Like the National Guard, like there's many examples where you could see these things could have been stopped when there was early examples of are, clear. The point is, I think we all understand that these things were allowed, not from a left versus right perspective, but from a government perspective, these things were a means to an end. That there were people within these groups that were part of, authority figures from, whether local police or FBI kind of concepts. We've seen this going, like, what was the guy? I mean, and on all these conversations, right? Where they're talking about the Proud Boys over here and what's his name, who's an FBI informant, or the Black Lives Matter elements. Like, that's the thing we're really trying to hopefully pull out of all this today with all this conversation of like we just had on that whole round table. It's like, we have to start recognizing this is the two-party illusion is being gamed against us, as we all know here, to manipulate people into certain positions. That's not to say that there's not elements of all of these sides, but it's to focus on like something like that and just be, and as we've seen in the conversation over the years, and just make it about that's what happens in a left run area. It's just like, God, it just pains me.
She couldn't.
Ridiculous. Go ahead.
Once there was the rumors of Josh Shapiro, like there was no way she was going to be able to pick Josh Shapiro. Like,
I don't know. I mean, I thought that was probably
IDF. I thought so too. But once it starts getting out, an IDF volunteer, he definitely has dual citizenship. Then, right? You don't just go to Israel, volunteer to be in the army, and don't become you're.
Well,
I don't think
I would agree with you generally, but I think today we've seen people that have gone over and fought for them that I would argue probably don't have Israeli citizenship. I don't think they give a shit about anything, quite frankly. But you're right though, and I think that we've seen that with a lot of them. I think, and the point being that I think that doesn't make sense, or that they don't care. I don't think they care about that. As much as it's obvious the left is clearly more so pointing out the genocide, it's clear that they don't give a shit. I mean, they're still arming them. They're still, Kamala included.
Supposedly Waltz wants it. He's more of, not against what's going on with Gaza and Israel, supposedly.
Yeah, I don't believe it. I just don't. I'm willing to bet you that would be the thing they say, because they know that's going to help them in the perception. But then once it comes around, they'll have a narrative about why they have to defend their ally. That's almost always
another thing. You would have had an IDF soldier versus a Marine, basically for VP. You would have had an IDF volunteer, and then up against a Marine, which is fucking crazy, as vice president. What, an IDF soldier? What the fuck are we talking about here?
Weird,
right? I mean, what the fuck are we talking about?
The rest of them,
now you have a Marine versus a 25-year Army Reserve.
And party insider and all that kind of crap. I mean, so the Democrats, when the Democrats have a field a presidential candidate, historically, the vice president is either some token identity politics weirdo like Kamala Harris, or some old ass crusty white dude party insider like Lloyd Benson or Joe Biden, or fucking any of these guys, so the pool for VP candidates is pretty tiny to begin with. And it's one,
I can't believe they even had a pool.
Well, they couldn't do Newsom, and they couldn't do Michelle Obama, and they couldn't do any of their celebrity candidates.
Why not?
Because because they know they're going to lose this time. Kamala Harris is a fucking loser. They know that Trump is supposed to be the selection, so they're going to field just dumbasses so that there's a demand, right? This is still problem, reaction, solution. Well,
no,
all of it.
I was going to say that Kamala Harris is in that same, and I know we're all in the same mindset. I think that this is not, that the voting is not the point, but I think that within that paradigm, Kamala Harris is just as unlikable, if not more. So my point would be, like, if the logic is they wouldn't have done that because it doesn't line up with, why would they go with Kamala? You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't seem to, I think it's the bigger point is it all seems engineered to like guarantee the perception Trump's guaranteed to win,
If Trump, and think about this. Right now, visually, what they're doing, like this shit right here. Let me mute this just in case it's echoing. This was comics for Camilla. I didn't know Adam Schiff was a comic. What a funny dude. But this is comics for Harris. There was supposedly 25,000 on this, including Tiffany Haddish. If you see her down in there in the bottom, I don't know why she still gets jobs. But
why the fuck is Adam in there?
I don't know. 25,000 comics, I guess, joined this Zoom call.
I don't
They
recognize
raised like
any of them.
$500,000 or something.
Oh, wait.
Well, I'm wondering
There's
how many
Patrick
on the
Griffin.
screen
Gross.
have had sexual, like, allegations and stuff.
I know
Just
Al
on the screen.
Madrigal
Oh,
has.
there's what's his face.
Oh, there's Tom Arnold, too. Yuck.
Stallwell. Look at him. Look at him. Anyway, so visually, they're really making a case that this has got the real, 4 years ago, she had 2% approval rating. 2%, right? Now they're getting everybody to believe that she's starting to blow the doors off Trump. Look at the comics. Look at the white dudes for Camilla. Look at the black dudes for. It's crazy because if they had a white dudes for Trump fucking Zoom, it would get shut down immediately, right? But they have white dudes for Camilla. All this shit. They're able to pack rallies using Megan Thee Stallion. They've already announced Beyonce is going to join that some sort of fundraiser. We can only assume she's bringing not someone from Philly, but some sort of entertainer tonight to open what she's doing in Philly. Like, so visually, they're making the case that Camilla is totally gonna win. All right. When the blue team's looking, the blue team's sitting there going, "Oh my God, look at that energy. Yay."
I don't know, though.
Right.
I don't know. Again,
And
I don't
then
think
it turns around and Trump wins. We have just inverted this because all these people are going to turn around and they're going to pull an insurrection just like fucking the last time, but it's going to be the other side. I mean, it's a psyop. It's a great inverted psyop, just like Derrick keeps talking about. Like, think about that. You get the fucking blue team to do what the red team did the last time, like complete fucking chaos. And do you think the red team's going to stand around and let the blue team do this? Dude, like, it's like we're in a big kettle. We're the boiling frogs, right?
I don't know.
It seems to be.
There's a lot of things that stand out in that. Like, I mean, that I think that clearly the point is, which is kind of what you're saying, is that Kamala Harris is being presented as that when it's obviously not the case. And I think that's Hillary Clinton, Trump all over again, right? Just the lazy recycling of the same kind of games, But I just don't know. I just don't think that it's as like. You certainly could be exactly right. I mean, I can see how that would play, the same way, to where you almost could guarantee that the right would react. Not all conservatives, but the team sport politics Republicans would clearly react because it's about we're going to use it against you. Like, that's the kind of petty mindset. So they'll react to that clearly. But I just don't. I think it would be. I feel like this is about something bigger than just the same back and forth of the paradigm. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I keep. This is something bigger that's going on right now, whether it's foreign entities or whatever. And I think that this is logically about some kind of larger destabilization, but that very well could add that could
Here's
be it
the
right
awesome part is you make it so visually you make these people believe Camilla is the most loved fucking person ever, right? She loses, creates chaos for the blue team. Jamie Raskin's already running around saying we're pulling Section 3 of Article of the 14th Amendment. As soon as Trump wins, we're pulling our Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and we're going to disqualify him. So you get the blue team riled up, right? Because they just lost what they seen visually with their own eyeballs. Should have been a fucking landslide, right? And then
you talking about the government. When you say the team, are you talking about the people average or
the people is the team. That's the. They're down there.
What I find interesting is that those are the ones we're all kind of agreeing all know they don't like Kamala. So why would they then react under the impression that she won and they should? You know what I mean? Like, that's what I'm confused about.
Well, they're being told to like Kamala, and they're being shown that all of these famous people adore her, worship the ground she walks on. She is the most capable, the most competent, strong, proud black woman. Blackity black.
Woman.
Especially since
it's not supposed to work.
Ones that have clearly recognized that they're all supporting Israel. Like, the left is the largest entity seeing that. So I just don't think. But that's what I'm. If you say it's not supposed to work, then that doesn't make sense with the logic of the point. Is that I'm seeing that. Like, I think there's a point to this that makes sense, but if they're supposed to be the ones that don't support her or they don't believe in her and they're being tricked into it, like, I guess the argument would be like, do we think they're just going to fall for that? That's what I'm saying. I don't think they will. I think that there's so many things going on.
They
where
all
they're like,
took
I don't
Trump
buy
juice.
this right now. And so how does that amount after the fact? You know, it's interesting.
They
Like,
all still
whatever.
wear masks.
The way that I see the Harris campaign is that it's the money laundering operation to gear up for being the resistance for 4 years so that they can then put their Bilderberg WEF management team in place in 2028 for the 2030 rollout. That's how I see the whole thing. Act Blue is a huge money laundering operation
Oh my
to begin
God.
with.
Yeah.
But I think that the powers that be or whatever know that Harris is a loser. They know that Trump and the PayPal mafia need 4 years to set up the infrastructure for the digital prison, all that kind of shit. They'll have a nice little financial collapse in the middle of it. And then the competent Democrats can step into place 4 years later. And then we can begin to heal again, gentlemen. We can begin to heal again.
So even on Trump, I just noticed Truth Social, their Trump campaign rips or RIPs reported Harris VP picks. They're commenting on the socialism statement. It's just so perfect. It's like exactly what you could throw in there to have them all, hair on fire. Socialism is the only thing we should care about.
Dude,
It's
if
all
they
that.
would have picked Josh Shapiro, yes, then the left that you're talking about, that's against, what's going on.
The anti-genocide left.
Right. Or just
Yes.
human beings
The ones that
care about genocide,
yes, would have they wouldn't have had that. Now you brought this guy in who supposedly is wanting this to end and wanting negotiations, so now you got this old guy who they keep showing the pictures of the kids hugging him because he gave them free lunches, so you change it's yeah, I mean, if they would have picked Josh Shapiro, you wouldn't have been able to sell this. I thought they were going to because they don't give a fuck. They clearly don't give a shit. But no, they went with this guy because, I mean, Josh Shapiro was a fucking volunteer IDF.
Yeah, I mean, he's walked this back, like he's already, the point is that they all seem to be kind of trying to step into that role. I mean, honestly, I don't see the difference. I see either, other than the statement about trying to wanting to end this, which Shapiro probably would have done the same or kind of even alluded to the different, like, I think they all are leaning into the direction of like ceasefire and, you know what I mean? So it's all just these varying positions about what support.
It's just easier with this old fat white guy than it was with the Jew guy that was an IDF soldier. You know what I'm saying? It's easy. It's going to be easier to sell that they want to back down. They want a ceasefire. They want all this shit. Than it was with than it would have been with Josh Shapiro to sell that narrative. You know what I'm saying?
I guess, but I just don't think the people we're talking about on the left are coming from the same position that you're kind of, like, my point would be that these people are not, by and large, and frankly, I don't think anybody honest with this position is going, he's Jewish, therefore that's the problem. I think that's kind of the paradigm, racist.
No, I think it was the IDF thing.
That's the point. It's about whether you're pro-Israel, and so the idea is that both of them are very clearly money, funding coming from lobbyists. Like, so I think, I think that this is more about framing, and it's more about the way the right looks at it all from within that framing, right? But I think that I get the general point, but I think that right now this is about creating the best failing counterbalance to the obvious Trump selection. That's what I think we've already talked about. That's what I keep seeing this as. It just, everything continues to amount to, like, it's a no. I mean, look at Kamala Harris seems to have gotten stupider, if that's possible, over the last couple of weeks with her comments. It's like, is she actually? I mean, I've seen her speak before,
dude. She got sent home early during.
To just never make sense with even like her words don't even line up together. Like, it's just the weirdest thing in the world. I think it's because they're driving you to support Trump. Like, there are now Democrats that are supporting Trump.
You see the situation room they had. Was it yesterday over Iran and Israel, and she left early.
Yeah, they were like, okay, you can leave now.
You can get out of here. We've got the pictures we need. Get out of here.
She was just in there to blow one general.
I don't know about that, but she did get sent home early in a very woman-esque way, I guess. You know, she had to go get a nap in before she went to Philly.
I don't know if it's like a cultural mental illness. I really don't like that. Just lets people walk around believing that they have the right to exterminate whoever the fuck they want, whenever the fuck they want. Yeah, this is crazy.
Yeah,
like this is legitimately insane.
It is. And the craziest part is that I was just saying this on the last show, is that the both the United States Department, the U.S. government, as well as the International Atomic Energy Agency have now more than once explicitly stated that Iran is not seeking nuclear weapons, despite Israel just continuing to say this for the last 30 years straight. You know, and that's what he's talking. He's using these same old lies to hype the idea that they should be bombing their nuclear program. It is a civilian nuclear program like every other country has the legal right to have. And on top of that, almost every other country also has a nuclear program for weaponry, you know, including Israel. You know, and the point is that Iran, why they would not have the same right to that as well, that's ridiculous. But the point is simply that they have stated that they're not. They state this is a religious, what is it, fatwa, or I forget the term. It's basically that they don't. What is the term? Do you remember that, Steve?
I think fatwa is the right term.
Right? I don't want to say the wrong thing, but the point is that they say that it's against their religion, and I'm sure people would disagree. And what we get these kind of hype on. The point is that, again, confirmed by other entities that they're not. And even the conversation of like the JCPOA and the kind of Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran deal, the whole idea was that the U.S. broke that deal. And then I showed this relentlessly as within the deal, one of the, I think it was even point 33 or 35, that if they did that, they then had the legal right to increase their enrichment percentage, right? And it's the moment they did that, they started going, look, they're increasing their enrichment, and they're terrorists. It's like, for fuck's sake, it's literally written in the deal you agreed to that if you were to pull out, then they have this right. It's just mindless. And people like Lindsey Graham are very aware of that. And still to this point, they argue they're not seeking these things. You know, it's fucking dangerous because Iran is not some, you know, despite the way that our country tried to frame these things, like it's just, you know, terrorists in caves, they are very technologically advanced, you know, and it's just dangerous that they act like we can flirt with this game. I honestly think the United States government is just so completely overwhelmed with its loss of influence, you know, and just what's because of Israel more than anything, that I don't think they know what to do. You know, like they're trying to like balance this extreme maniacal Israel agenda with like not losing everything, you know, and that's what we're seeing. I don't think they want to take this to war other than maybe maniacs like Graham. I really don't, but they'll do it anyway.
Because they're being led by the nose by that Zionist entity. I mean, yes, right. I think Lindsey Graham is a freaking, you know, a warmongering maniac, but there's been a number of people that have left the Biden administration over the Israel policy. So, you know, we've had a number of people go on record in various positions throughout the State Department, the Defense Department, the Diplomatic Corps that are like, no, this is insane. Knock it off. And now we're just kind of at a, you know, everybody's like basically waiting to see if Israel's going to go ahead and Samson option freaking all of its neighbors.
Yeah, I'm worried. I mean, that's a genuine concern, man. You don't have to bring this up if you don't want to, but this is the a clip of one of the people that resigned. Right? I mean, resigned about the rape allegations. It's a good. I always think it's an important clip for people to hear.
For sure.
To condemn the atrocities that happen every day to Palestinians in the West Bank. You mentioned sexual violence. I was part of the human rights vetting process for arms going to Israel, and a charity called Defense of Children International Palestine drew our attention at the State Department to the sexual assault, actually the rape of a 13-year-old boy that occurred in an Israeli prison in the Mosque in Jerusalem. We examined these allegations. We believe they were credible. We put them to the government of Israel. And you know what happened the next day? The IDF went into the DCIP offices and removed all their computers and declared them a terrorist entity. I think it is vital that atrocities not happen to anyone, not sexual violations, not any kind of gross violation of human rights. We are looking at a situation where there is so much dehumanification, where people are not seen.
That's just, I mean, it's, I don't know, subhuman. It's fucking gnarly.
I mean, it's wild to me that, you know, I mean, good on him for having the you know, the integrity to stand back and just go, I can't support this, you know, like literally raping children. And instead of doing something about it, they go after the group, calling it out and declare them terrorists. It's like, let that reflect on what they call terrorists in the world. You know what I mean? Like, it's pretty alarming. I think I found that thing, by the way. So I think that's probably what Chris is still looking for. Here's the, let me see. I think this is the one. Hold on.
Yeah, I think I got it.
Here, bring that up.
And I was looking at.
This is the one from 2022. And that,
dude, I was totally
Emblem of
confused. I kept
delegation
looking
of
at this.
certain functions. And if you read into it, it's very specific about this one conversation and one aspect of it. You know, I mean, let's
Yeah,
even
for
say
the
that he
repo
delegated,
for Ukrainians Act. Yeah.
yeah.
is
So
what
let's just
it's
say that he
for.
delegated like all of the responsibilities in one field of war. Like, still, the idea that it was framed as all of the presidential responsibilities. This is just,
What's
people just need to
interesting-
be careful what they listen to today. There's a lot of, you
Yeah.
know, everyone has the right to lie.
It's-
That's free speech. But consider that, right? People are lying to you out there.
Is about the Repo for Ukrainians Act, which involves Russia and taking Russian assets, which when Iran and Israel will involve Russia as well, right?
Say it again. I'm sorry. What was it?
Well, it's Anthony Blinken is delegated the powers over the Repo Act for Ukrainians Act. It's the what the hell is it called?
Well, I don't know. I just had it up, but it's not on the top of my head, but-
Economic Prosperity and Opportunity for Ukrainians Act, the Repo thing, which involves basically repossessing Russian assets and taking Russian assets, and involves Russia. And it's just interesting because Iran and Israel conflict is going to involve. I mean, Russia's already said they'll send them weapons, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, but this is, you know, what's funny about the way this is framed is that this is no different than what the U.S. government does everywhere else. You know, so it's just funny to me that it's like, so Russia has clearly taken the side of defending, in this case, the people of, or rather specifically the Donbass and Crimea against the occupation of the United States, or defending Syria against the continual occupation of the United States and bombing of Israel. And, you know, the same way anywhere. Now, it's not to say good, bad. Those are just objective facts. But I think what's interesting is that if Russia steps in to try to deliver arms to people that are defending or fighting in any sense, how is that different than, you know, and I'm not asking you, Chris, I'm just posing this to anybody listening. How is it different than the United States giving weapons to moderate rebels, or, you know what I mean? Like any government they're working with, it's the same thing. So it's funny how that gets
It's like
framed
the
as
argument. God, where was that? There's a clip going around where they oh yeah, I might have that. Let me see if I can find that. Where that journalist asked, he said, so Israel has a right to defend themselves.
Yeah.
He's like, oh yes, blah blah blah. And then he goes, but Iran doesn't. Well,
I have that clip.
Do you
both
got
Matt
it?
Miller and Patel, both of them are put on the. I think it was Saeed with Patel, and then I forget. But yeah, both of them are unwilling to say Iran has the right to defend itself. Like, how pathetic is that?
Yeah, I have the I have the Matt Miller one. I don't have the
I've got the other one.
Saeed one. But yeah,
You play that one first. I'll look for the other one.
Okay.
It's so fucking fucked up.
I mean, dude,
but it is interesting because if Russia gets wrapped up, then whatever is delegated to Blinken gets wrapped up in the Russia thing with the Ukrainian thing on the repo.
This guy looks like he's. I mean, he looks like he's been a vampire for about 8 centuries. He does. He's just got that vibe. I don't know.
Yeah.
Man. Freaking spokes weasel.
Matt, in your response to Libya and to Simon, as a matter of fact, you urged the Iranians, it's not in their interest to respond and so on. But at least, do they have the right to respond? I mean, is that part of self-defense?
So as I just answered that question.
On the issue of self-defense.
I just answered that question in response to what he got from Simon. A right is one thing.
Right.
Taking steps that are productive and are conducive to the interests of their people,
Right.
that are conducive to the interests of the broader region, are another question. And in no way would a retaliatory action by Iran in any way serve the interests of the Iranian people or the broader region.
And that's precisely why I'm asking you, because you mentioned the word right. So you are acknowledging that they do have the right to respond.
No, I did not acknowledge that.
Okay.
I acknowledged the question.
Okay, then let me ask you, if this was, let's say,
God, this guy's fucking sneering face just sends me into.
Wait, who shot into Israel and killed that Hamas guy? I mean, into Iran.
Israel.
Yeah. So
yeah,
they kind of
targeted
escalated it
assassination
outside of their region.
Not just in Iran, Chris, but Syria as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And Lebanon, right?
And Lebanon.
Constantly. And what's crazy about it is that what they're saying on the surface is that anytime Israel attacks you, that's because they're defending and they have a right, and that's in the interest of everyone else. But no matter how many times we attack you, you respond against us is not in the interest of everybody else. So there is no right. It's just mindlessly stupid, and everybody can see it, including everybody in this room. That's my point. It's like, why would they keep doing this?
Yeah. So doctors, if you want to understand this very simply, they care more about keeping their job than about doing their job.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
It's accurate.
It's an industry.
Yeah.
Let's see. So here's the lovely Scottish fella. Let's go ahead and
It's a fun little
we looked at a very good article out of Off Guardian yesterday that Kit Knightley put out. And his supposition, or at least his conclusion, was like, hey, by the way, all of this is completely manufactured to usher in a brand new police state and a nightmare dystopian surveillance state. So get out there and be dumb, kids, or maybe don't. Maybe don't. Yeah.
Dude, just brings me back to Children of Men. Like when they're just rounding up immigrants, putting them in cages, treating them like it's like the predictive programming has been in your face for so long.
Speaking of, yeah, I got an email yesterday about some predictive programming thing. I haven't actually taken a look at it yet. Al Jazeera talking about Kamala.
Oh, it turns out the riots themselves have actually spread to.
Oh, aye.
He's Scottish.
All right then.
Aye.
Belfast now. Business and cars set on fire as fresh violence breaks out in Belfast. And one thing that I bet this article isn't going to talk about is, and there was a friend I had who was actually on the ground and like sending me pictures, is you had the loyalists and nationalists standing next to each other. There was like red hand of Ulster flags being waved right next to tricolours while everyone was chanting immigrants out. Because if there is one thing that you can unite two enemies, it's a bigger enemy. Anyway, a business was set on fire in Belfast on Saturday night as fresh disorder broke out in the city following anti-immigration protests, which is also known as Belfast on a Saturday night. The Police Service of Northern Ireland, PSNI, was maintaining a presence in the Donegal Road area in the south of the city, where several cars and a number of bins were also set alight. Belfast. During violence earlier in the day, businesses were attacked after an anti-immigration protest moved through the city. Giving an update on Saturday night, a PSNI spokesperson said police are dealing with ongoing disorder in the Donegal Road area of South Belfast tonight. This disorder has resulted in a business premises being set on fire. The public should avoid the Donegal Road and Sandy Row areas. Earlier in the day, police mounted a significant security operation during a lengthy confrontation between anti-Islamic protesters and those taking part in an anti-racist rally at Belfast City Hall, during which fireworks and other missiles were thrown. People taking part in the anti-Islam demonstration then travelled towards the university area of the city, where there were clashes with residents of the Lower Ormo area. A business was attacked in the Botanic area of the city, and windows were smashed at a hotel. A number of social media messages during the week had been shared asking for people to gather and block roads. I've seen this one before in the Greater Belfast area and elsewhere in the wake of the murders of 3 young children in Southport. Stormont leaders have condemned the violence in Belfast. Northern Ireland's First Minister Michelle O'Neill said Belfast is a progressive and inclusive city, because that's obviously the words that every government stooge has to parrot no matter what. She wrote on social media, years of dedication and hard work from people across our community have transformed it for the better, I think. That was the Good Friday Agreement, actually. But anyway, together we will keep moving forward towards a brighter future for Belfast, a city that flourishes free from hate and division. That's not true. Anybody seen the giant peace walls that run between housing estates so that they don't kill each other? Belfast, free from division. No. Deputy First Minister Emma Little-Pengelly said, Northern Ireland must always be a place that protects the right to protest, the right to have a view, and to express it. Funnily enough, all of the football songs that you can get arrested for over here in Scotland, not banned in Belfast. Not banned in Belfast. However, girls with a Belfast accent would. But anyway, let's be very clear. Violence is not acceptable. It never was, and it is not now. No one has the right to express hate and violence. Stop it now. Actually, people do have a right to express hate because it's protected freedom of speech. If people want to say, I don't like X group, then they are completely within their rights to say that. Right? They're not committing an act of violence. None of the speech is violence. Shut up. Shut up. No, it's not. Before I slit your throat with an adjective like speech is violence. Shut up. Right? They do have a right to express hate. In fact, the fact that people aren't able to express hate is, why you end up with riots. Alliance Party leader and Justice Minister Naomi Long said, those trashing our city and attacking businesses should be ashamed. She added, they should also face the full legal consequences of their actions. Unlike those working to build businesses and a better future, these hate mongers offer nothing but division and destruction. Said by someone in the government. In a post on X, Northern Ireland Secretary Hilary Benn said, shame on those involved in violent disorder in Belfast today. Hatred has no place in our society. I commend the officers of the PSNI for everything they have done to keep people safe. Now, some people might be fucking freaking out and all that. See the PSNI? Oh, they're used to this. This is a Tuesday for them. That's why PSNI are a completely different breed to your average police officer because they turn up and that's why you see the police in London with the riot shields and getting bricks thrown at them and they're like, oh, the PSNI will have bricks getting whizzed over their head while they're sitting in the back of the van smoking a fag. They don't care. It's like veterans in Iraq and Afghanistan. You can tell all the scrubs because whenever mortars are coming in, they're all diving for cover and running about and everything. Whereas the veterans are sitting there like that. Nah, he's shite. It'll be about half an hour before he figures out how to zero is. Calm the fuck down. Like, yeah, the PSNI are like that. They are very, very used to this type of thing. There's a reason a lot of them protect their identities. Although they had a data breach that actually exposed their identities. But anyway, this stuff is spreading to Northern Ireland as well. And one thing that Northern Ireland definitely knows how to do is have a little bit of a boog. Both sides in that conflict know how to have a bit of a boog. Except both sides seem weirdly together on this particular subject. So basically, you've got on one side Union Jacks and Red Handy Ulster flags and Irish tricolours and stuff like that and Green Brigade shit. And then on the other side, you had all the communist and Palestine flags and the gay flags. Have you ever seen that? Where is it? The Stone Toss comic with the tug of war? Huh? Like that's what's happened in real life in Northern Ireland. And again, what unites two enemies? An even bigger enemy. What's that Bedouin quote? Hold on. I'm going to actually read this quote to you. It was sent to me by someone. Where's the Bedouin quote? Ironically, it's a Bedouin quote. Who were the Bedouins again? Look it up. Yeah. I against my brother and I against our cousin, my brother, my cousin, and I against the neighbours, all of us against the stranger. I'm just saying, look, the Good Friday Agreement did a lot of heavy lifting, right? But it didn't exactly, a lot of stuff, everyone, dropped the Armalites and dropped the car bombs and stuff like that, mostly, right? But everyone still hated each other. However, you now have them arm in arm, chanting and singing and like partying with each other and all that type of stuff. And that is not something that we have seen for a very, very, very long time. And I never, ever in a million years expected to see that in my lifetime. Right, because see that, the Protestant Catholic stuff, it still exists like in a big way over here in Scotland. It has faded away slightly, somewhat. I used to have neighbors who used to tell me that I'm all right for a TIG and all that, but like it's still about, but it has faded away slightly. In Belfast, it hasn't faded away at all. Right, it's still very, very much a thing there. You still have the peace walls. You still have the fact that they are police, the PSNI, hide their faces and don't reveal their identities and stuff. A lot of them probably still peek under their car in the morning before they go and drive to work. Right, very much it's still a thing over there in Northern Ireland. However, the rules have changed. The government is getting very, very nervous. Wait a minute, they like each other now? This is bad. This is very, very bad. I think it's great. I think it's great. Racism really brings us together.
I mean, yeah. Yeah. I believe that's one of those. Yeah, Courtney, what's happening? How's it going? Good morning.
Good morning. Doing well. Yeah. How's everyone doing here?
I'm still reeling from getting chastised by William Ramsey, Courtney.
Well, I think he was a little thrown off. It was you came in and kind of unloaded. So
my buddy Dave, Nature Boy, has a couple of wonderful shows, and they stream out on the AM Wake Up, Rockfin, and Rumble. Courtney and William Ramsey were the guests on Friday. Dave leaves it open as to whether or not, I pop in. They had and he likes to keep the shows fairly short. So Courtney and William and Dave went for like 45 or 50 minutes or something like that. I popped in for a little bit. After a few, 10, 15 minutes, it transitioned to Donald Trump. Courtney and I were having what I thought was a fun and relevant conversation about how Trump governed and the things that he did while in office and how they were reflective of Paul Ryan and Mitt Romney's wish list from 2012, because that's what happened. And William Ramsey became quite agitated and chastised pretty much everybody, although there are theories, Courtney, that he was white knighting for you on your behalf. But yeah, we got chastised for going off topic, even though Donald Trump was a topic of the show.
You can go off topic on the internet?
I think he felt like the topic was more the Olympics. That's what we were discussing at first, and then we segued a little bit. I know Trump was part of it, but it was really more around the semiotics was kind of the focus of the conversation. I think he was very focused on the symbology, the semiotics, and the references there. So I think that's did. I thought fine. I mean, my shows, we go all over the place, and I'm fine with going all over the place and doing all sorts of tangents, and that's but I think he felt like we were, I don't know. So
I don't know. Sometimes I make people angry, and I occasionally, if you're a gentleman of a certain age. And you are also, you got at least a leg up on the Trump train. You are generally going to be wildly offended by my mere presence, let alone the things that I have to say. So
I try to take, what the things that are valuable. I don't think you're going to agree with everybody on everything. I often don't even agree with myself all the time, like sometimes I look back and I'm like, oh, I completely disagree with what I said there. And I would expect that from most people. That means that you're, reflective, and that you're willing to examine information, and you're willing to, make new assessments as new data points come forth. So but I welcome being able to have conversations, I don't think that you have to agree with everybody on everything in order to have discourse. I think this discourse is actually really important. So
Well, Courtney, would you agree that the tempo for conversation in the general way in which we go about living our lives, which are manners and civility, has been set so that your friends are agreement engines? And so everyone has turned into an agreement engine. They aren't capable of discourse because automatically you're adversarial, you're enemies. So they can't even have a conversation like that. You either agree or you can't disagree, you know?
I think to some extent, I actually think social media has really exacerbated that. And the reason for that is because through text, through written word, it's especially short, condensed written word, it's very hard to, discern connotation. And so somebody could say something and it's written as very factually, and the person will become triggered by it because they can't, differentiate whether there's a joke or whether there's nuance. And so then when you're interacting in person, that becomes kind of conditioned. And so people are less able to have a nuanced discourse because they're so used to it being polarizing.
I think that's a fantastic insight, because in essence, that means that every time that we're online, we are unconsciously basically creating friction, almost static electricity, and then we go out and electrocute one another when we're in real life because of the preconceived misconceptions which are habitually entrained into the population. So
Yeah, I agree. So it's unfortunate, but I also think it's partially by design. I think that's a part of what it's designed to do, and that's how the algorithmic cybernetic feedback loops are programmed. They're programmed to exacerbate that and to condition us, so that we interact that way in person. And I think that the further they move into a more alternate kind of synthetic reality, that it'll be less easy for people to distinguish between the physical domain and the virtual domain. And so I think they're doing that intentionally, and they're exponentially hyping that up. Yeah,
I noticed during COVID, and I want to kind of throw it around the room here too, to just kind of cross check experiences. But it seemed like during lockdown, the way that people were interacting was like it was a comment thread. Like they just had, 120 character phrases that they would scream at each other. And I don't know if you guys had analogous experiences or not, but I'm curious.
I literally went through week-long back and forths with people who were doing nothing but copy and pasting from the large-scale expert-approved version of things and punching holes in it in plain view of everyone. They would never let go no matter what. So it's one of those really terrifying things. Like, to quote Dune, fear is the mind killer. Once people are in fear, their mind's not there.
Yeah, they actually did studies where, I believe this was during, the like Nazi era, where they found that in order to create amnesia, to erase memories was very easy. They were able to do that in, most of the population that they tested. But in order to create false memories was actually quite difficult and very challenging. But if a person was under heightened stress or in a state of fear, then 90% of them were able to create false memories. So I think that speaks to that. The people, when they're in a state of fear, they're much more malleable. They're much more susceptible to programming, to conditioning. And I would argue that there's a lot of evidence to indicate that COVID was a mass scale trauma-based mind control program.
Oh yeah. You see that in Clockwork Orange too, right?
Yeah.
Where they have his eyes pinned open and feeding him. And we were just talking earlier about like the amnesia thing and wiping people's memory, how this new phenomenon of concert amnesia at Taylor Swift concerts, where people are completely forgetting that they were even there, something that they, was a huge thing in their life.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is that you can do that through trauma, but there's also a lot of technology that can do that, like frequency, light, sound technology. I've recently done some investigation into the GATE program, the Gifted and Talented Education programs. And there's a lot of evidence that the CIA was doing some testing and experimenting. And this was kind of a beta testing ground, as well as a potential recruiting arena for them. And I've talked to a lot of people who've been through these programs, and I myself was actually in one. It was an adjacent one through Johns Hopkins called the CTY, Center for Talented Youth. But there are some who remember things, and what they remember was actually quite traumatic. And then there's a large portion of us who remember nothing. And I'm one of them. I remember the first day, and I only remember the first day because it's going to sound so silly, but I remember her name even. Sharon was a girl from nursery school who I remembered, and we hadn't seen each other since nursery school. And she was my buddy because I guess we were disagreeable personalities, and we both hated nap time because, it's arbitrary. It's like you're not allowed to go to the bathroom during nap time. At least where I went to nursery school. And I thought this was just asinine, it's like, okay, you spend all this time, learning how to, listen to your body. And then they tell you, oh no, but just not during this time, it's like arbitrary. And even at the age of 2 to 4, I just did not have any patience for this. And she didn't either. So, both of us used to make a big stink about it. And then we ran into each other in this program. And that's all I remember. And I remember the first day setting us up, and the first day we were going through kind of word and math kind of puzzle problems. And, kind of similar to what you would see on standardized tests, like the LSATs or something like that. But I don't remember the rest of it, like the entire rest of the program. I have no recollection at all. And I've talked to a lot of people who the same applies. And then, through doing some research on it, because I was obviously curious, why don't we remember anything? And I talked to someone who was actually a Monarch programmer. And he had told me that if I did start to do, some investigative work, and I might have some kind of sensations flood, because that's been his experience with a lot of those people, like me, who didn't have memories and then did the research. And he said, to be very careful not to try and associate it, because it might literally be just a remembrance, a recollection of the traumatic reaction to some of this testing that was just like the light and frequency and sound testing that they were doing. Not necessarily an actual experience, because we're meaning-making creatures. We try to, find what was the scenario that created this trauma? And he said, don't do that. It might literally just be like you had a response to a frequency that was trying to make you feel a certain way. That might be all you remember is the feeling. So it was interesting.
Were you a GATE program kid, Adam?
How did you know I was?
Were we all in tag and stuff? What was going on? That's interesting.
I mean, because I was, and I found that there are a number of people, not only that I generally get along with in this. Huh?
I said all the smart kids on the morning conspiracy show.
I mean,
imagine that.
I know, dude. It seems like whenever this subject comes up, if there's 5 people on screen, 4 of them were in it.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's because we think outside the box.
They tried to recruit me when I was 7, and I had always heard the story, but from my mom, she said that they actually tried for 9 months. She kept hanging up on them. So, and I always thought those 2 instances were isolated. I thought they were separate, but this Monarch programmer who I spoke to said there's no way. They said that, my later being in the CTY program was definitely related to them trying to recruit me earlier. I don't know. I can't prove that. That's,
I heard they're trying to recruit kids, right? So they bring them in testing, whether it's sensory testing, mathematics, just trying to personality test. And then the ones that buck the system end up paying for it. Me, I was locked away, basically. I mean, I was a bad kid, but they put me in this tag program right off I think 2nd grade is when I started, and I had been kicked out of kindergarten because I couldn't take naps properly, right? And I was put on
Wait,
Ritalin.
what? What's up with the naps?
Well, they put me on Ritalin when I was 5 years old, because I couldn't nap properly.
Right.
I was a hyperactive kid, and then was put into the tag. And I remember the sensory test, and just it was every other day they would come to the classroom and call me out, and I go down to the tag thing, and it's like, what the fuck am I so cool about, look, talented and gifted. What the fuck are you talking about? They put me in playing chess and all this shit. And then I bucked the system pretty much I haven't been a conspiracy person since second grade, but I naturally am a rebel, and then I ended up locked away until I turned 18, pretty much from 10 to 17. I was locked away in those programs that are behavioral modification programs. I don't know if you've seen those two documentaries that are now come out on Netflix.
I haven't.
Yeah, those cause some fucking PTSD watching those. I'll tell you that. Like, that shit was crazy. That they put you through.
They definitely got you monarched.
I might be like American Ultra. I keep referring to that Thomas Crooks and referring to the American Ultra movie with Jesse Eisenberg, how he's a stoner, he's monarched, right? And someone comes in and activates him, but he's a stoner, so he isn't activated properly, right? And he's like fucking kicking people's ass because they're trying to kill him now that he's activated because he's supposed to be like super fucking monarch or something. And it's like,
what movie is that? I've never seen that.
American Ultra with Jesse Eisenberg and the chick from Twilight. I don't know what her name is, Kirsten something. But
it's fairly recent. Yeah.
No,
it's like 2015 or something like that. I remember
seeing the trailer.
Also, I just want to interject while we're on the topic, and Adam, this will kind of touch on something that I alluded to in our conversation earlier. Courtney, I don't know if you've read it yet, but this is the best book I found on it. It's MK
I have it. I have not read it, but I'm dying to read it. I have a very long.
Great. It is like the full case history, comprehensive review of the entire thing going back in history, as well as all the trauma conferences. It's great. So check it out if you haven't.
I definitely will. Yeah. So when I was saying like they tried to recruit me, I mean the agency separately of the the CTY program. So, and in terms of Monarch, I mean, obviously I didn't know at the time, but now looking back, I'm like, I have all the, the preferred requirements of what they look for a Monarch.
So are we all on the island of misfit kids for like the failures of the gate program? Or is it a failure if you go out on a limb and you become like this? I don't know.
Can I start my theory first? Can I do my first?
Activate us or something. I'm afraid they activate us or something.
No. Okay, so
I know, right?
now hold on. I'll start off the conversation. Here's my theory on what the whole thing is and why they built it this way. I think what it was that they were they identify almost like a resonant. I don't know what verbiage to use, but basically they pick people who are capable of things, and then they create societal molds to gradually condition and culture them in a stark juxtaposition to large-scale cultural kind of like trauma. So my personal experience as an artist coming up with like 3 different parents who are all psychologists. I wasn't in the gifted thing, but like father's a neuropsychologist, mother's a like video game and dream researcher, and my stepmother's a clinical psychologist. So weird environment. Pardon?
Did you say dream researcher?
Yeah, video game and dream researcher.
I wrote 2 85-page theses in high school on dream analysis. My school.
Okay, so her name's Jane Gackenbach. Have you ever heard of her?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, so that's my mom.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so what I think they did is I bring it back to like kind of just a personal significant year, and that was because I was a huge like film buff. They released Matrix, American Beauty, and Fight Club all in the same year. And it was immediately like 1999, preceding the events of September 11th. So they almost give you the ingredients that you need in a spiritual or like a predictive programming model to orient yourself in the positive direction. And then they stamp on it with rejection from mainstream society. And then that stamping on hammers you out over time. So it's almost like they wanted to create the alternative media to emerge from the long scale trauma that they then immersed us in. And then we would be the people who disseminate the information seemingly organically as the CIA is pinned for all of the various different crimes that it's been committing. So it's a long form way of having us be the dissemination of what they've been hiding internally within the establishment by creating the cultural impetus for our emergence. That's my take anyway.
Wow. Well, I'm trying to find it. I can't, but you can pull this up very easily. It's It's a document. You can pull it off the CIA.gov site, and it's called From Mice to Rascals. And this is about, so what you're talking about is essentially how they recruit and groom change agents. And this document lays that out. And they don't say it explicitly. They do say it's a derivative of the OSS, the techniques that they use in the OSS. My theory on it, though, is that it actually comes out of the War Office Selection Boards, which was during right before Operation Phoenix with the transition period of Tavistock. There were a whole bunch of Tavistock psychologists who created a process for selecting the War Office Selection Board members. And they did what they call them intelligence tests. But when you read their writings, they actually say that it's not so much intelligence test the way you would think of like an IQ test. It's more about adaptability really like mental adaptability and maybe acuity to some extent. But so the acronyms are, so MICE, it's money, ideology, coercion, and what was the other one? Coercion and compliance, and then ego. And that was MICE, but then they decided that Rascals was a better acronym and a more useful way to recruit. And it was reciprocity, authority, the Rascals, and then S is I'll have to look it up. I don't remember the whole thing, but it's very similar to what the MICE was. They just changed it a little bit. I remember the L was liking. Let me see if I can find it. MICE to Rascals. Yes, it's right here. So it's rethinking an old approach and alternative framework for agent recruitment, from MICE to Rascals. And let me see if I can find what the Rascals stood for. And it's right off the CIA.gov. And let's see, it was okay. So Rascals was, the C always has a double entendre, and it's the reciprocity, authority, security is the S, and then C is commitment and consistency, and L is liking, and the other S is social proofing.
So these are the social strata, like, I don't know, demographics that they zero in on to create cultural agents?
To recruit. So it's a recruiting.
Yeah.
And they don't just say change agents, but they're
it's looking for specific things, right?
Yeah, it's not just in like social or cultural change agents. I mean, this was actually how they recruit. They say it's to recruit assets, agents for the CIA and for the OSS. But I'm saying that because I've studied the War Office Selection Board's process through Tavistock, and this is what they did. It was around the time of World War II. They had created this process of being able to select these various leaders who were going to be on the War Office Selection Boards, and a lot of them went on to be OSS and various intelligence and military officials.
So they're like looking for specific people to groom into specific spots.
So change agent, that's a term from Kurt Lewin, who was a Tavistock deputy director. And it's this idea that it's going to be some sort of a leader who has been groomed, but they're groomed to then lead and shift a group. So it could be any group. It could be within military, it could be culturally, it could be in a corporation.
Right, but I suppose my point of clarification is these are for habitually indoctrinating people who are then recruited within the system, knowingly of their own volition, or from an age wherein they would later choose that without realizing that they were habitually conditioned.
It's both. Oftentimes the people don't realize that they're being conditioned. Oftentimes they're being enticed. Right. Yeah. That's why I actually think the first one, MICE, is actually much more on target, Yeah, but they had to change it. Maybe MICE was too on the nose for people. I don't know. So they had to change it a little bit. They muddy the waters to make it look deep. So a lot of times it's people are being groomed from what were they doing recruiting people at 7 years old, like.
But not only to be leaders, but to be spies, they're looking for
what I'm saying,
killers. They're looking for
assets and
people that
agents.
can,
They
man.
say that in the article. They say assets, agents. Yeah, so a change agent could be a spy. It could be, and it's in any kind of a group. It doesn't have to be somebody you necessarily recognize as a frontman leader. That's, not, it can be, but, oftentimes it's not. But
that's why there were so many in these programs.
Yes.
They were shuffling them in and out,
And that is why they pick, as you were saying, they pick people who have specific kind of gifts and talents, who will oftentimes be, leaders, but it's in different regards. So, it could be somebody who's just a very talented artist, and then people will be drawn to that. It could be somebody who's just very charismatic kind of personality who has, the ability for or proclivity for certain niche things that is going to be useful to them. There's such a wide array of what it could be, but the technique of how they go about recruiting it, I think is very telling and useful to recognize. So
yeah.